Good morning, everyone. Delighted to see you here. I'm Rebecca Huddle of the Supreme Court. Welcome to the September Children's Commission meeting. I hope each of you had a lovely summer. We have some great material for everybody today. But before we dive in, I want to just say thank you. And I want to expand on that a little bit. I thank everybody every time for your participation and all of the energy that you bring to this commission. But today I wanted to reflect for a moment longer because I had an especially hard week. We had 11 cases argue in the last 3 days at the court. And so at the end of that, it was a kind of day where I was like, oh, this was a big week. But I was enlivened, energized by the idea of coming here today and seeing all of you here, bright-eyed and bushy-tailed. And I just wanted to acknowledge that because I know everyone has a day job. Everyone has a very full schedule. And then somehow you dig deep and you find the energy to give a little more to this commission, to Texas families, to children in need. And I just want to commend everybody here for digging deep and giving to something that's important and something outside yourself and bigger than yourself. So I'm going to give everybody here. Okay, a couple of housekeeping matters before we dive in. We'll break for lunch around noon, but not take other breaks. So if you need a break, please feel free to take it. The bathrooms are down the hall on the left. The meeting is being recorded and streamed on YouTube. And so welcome to folks joining us on YouTube. While the meeting is in progress, we have some very strong microphones on. And so I ask that you please try not to shuffle papers, ruffle papers, crumble papers, because the mics pick that up. They're very sensitive. Match forms are printed and placed where you're sitting. Please fill those out when you have a minute. This is required by the Federal Court Improvement Program grant. And lastly, close to lastly, allowable travel expenses can be reimbursed by the Children's Commission if you would like to request that. The printed reimbursement forms are available, or you can save a piece of paper by filling out the form on the Children's Commission website for your reimbursement. In addition to the meeting notebook you should have at your seat, you'll have a printed copy of your bio and headshot photograph, which is posted on the Children's Commission website. So if you want to change your photograph or change something about your bio, please mark any edits there and then return them to me or Jamie or one of the staff, or you can send them in if you don't want to make the revisions as you sit here today, send them in to children@texascourts.gov and we will get those updated for you. Collaborative council members, thank you for joining. If you have an update to give to the commission, then you're encouraged to fill out a card. Where can we get those cards? We will find that out with Tiffany over here. So please make a note to Tiffany on one of those cards before lunch ends, and then we'll allot some time toward the end of the meeting for each of you to give an update if you have one. So thanks to everyone for your cooperation in making the meeting today go smoothly, and welcome. Next, before we get to our first speaker, I want to address some membership changes. This is at tab 1 in your notebook. So let's jump there. It tells us who our commissioners are, who our committee members are, and who our collaborative council members are. And then in the bottom right, you can see the commission staff. And there are a couple of changes I want to highlight. Number 1, Judge Bill Harris over here. Welcome to him.
Myself.
He is the
We won't bite.
We don't bite, but we don't bite. Judge Harris is the current chair of the Child Protection Law section. And during his term, he'll also serve as a commissioner with us on this commission. Judge Harris is a judge of the Lamar County Court at Law in Paris, Texas. Welcome to Judge Harris. We look forward to having you join the group in this capacity. Luann Southern is no longer at the Texas Child Mental Health Care Consortium, but will continue on the commission. She's just putting on a different hat as the Chief Behavioral Health Strategist at DFPS. So congratulations on your new role, Luann. We look forward to working with you in this new capacity. Katie Olsey and Madeline Fletcher both left their roles and will no longer serve on the Children's Commission. We extend our heartfelt thanks to them for their contributions and wish them all the best in their next endeavors. Couple of changes on committees I want to highlight for everybody. Natalie Taylor left her role in state office and will no longer serve on our Systems Improvement Committee. And then Sub Apolari joins the Data Committee. Hope I got that right. He is the Texas CASA Data Manager. And so we're really lucky to have someone with his knowledge and expertise on the committee. Welcome, Sub. So I'd ask the whole group to join me in thanking each of these individuals, both incoming and outgoing, for their service to the Children's Commission. Okay, so typically we do this, the rolling new people on and giving our thanks to people rolling off in November, but it's hard to pass up an opportunity to thank two of our outgoing members here today. We have two valued commissioners whose terms will expire this year. And so we want to say thanks to both of them for all of their years worth of contributions. First, Chief Justice Darlene Byrne. She isn't here today, but we wanted to recognize her and hope to honor her another time when we're together. And then Judge Sirena Mireles, who is right here to my right. Thank you for giving us your wisdom and leadership over many years, and including the past 6 on the Children's Commission. We're grateful to you. With respect to staff now, I have more news to share about more change. Dylan, where is Dylan? Will be leaving us in his role of Director of Legal Representation. He is starting a new exciting endeavor as Chief Counsel at the Travis County Office of Child Representation, and I know they will be delighted to get the benefit of his wisdom and expertise and energy. Your contributions, Dylan, for 8 years are too many to mention, but know that your legacy at the Children's Commission will endure. We wish you all the very best in your new role. Okay, so I'm gonna keep us all on our toes. The next thing we would ordinarily do is approve minutes and dive into some commission business, but we're gonna mix things up a little today and take things in a slightly different order. And we're gonna start by welcoming Dr. Brock Boudreau. Dr. Boudreau is with the department, and he is here today to provide the department's update. He is the Deputy Associate Commissioner for CPS and will provide the DFPS update on behalf of the agency. So welcome, good morning. Thank you for being here and pinch hitting today, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Judge Huddle. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Brock Boudreau. I'm the Deputy Associate Commissioner for Child Protective Services. Erica Pancuelos is the Associate Commissioner. She couldn't be here. She expresses her regrets. I know that you're probably disappointed too, if you with me. Judge Huddle used my title doctor. She and my mother are the only ones who do that.
Welcome.
Probably only the second time I've heard it. Nobody believes it, but thank you. I want to talk a little bit. I know I have a DFPS update and there's a lot on the agenda today. And I know that Deputy Commissioner Sims is going to go through some data for you and there's quite a bit of updates there. And so seeing that I'm so outranked, I'd better not steal any of that thunder. So I've prepared some other remarks. Part of my business, I used to be a teacher, so I'll tell you a story and maybe I can weave some things in for you. But the first thing I want to say is that the Children's Commission is a really integral partner to the department for achieving safety and permanency and well-being for children. No organization, regardless of how well resourced or talented the people, can do it on their own. We have to work together to face all facets of child protection to achieve this really noble and incredibly complicated mission. Toward that end, we received some resources from the federal government, and they like to impose some oversight, which is only prudent on their part. And I want to talk a little bit about that today. It's really about the Children and Family Services Review. I know that many of you have participated in that. The Children's Commission has been a great partner in that effort, and the judiciary is key to help us to achieve these permanency outcomes. So I'm going to frame my remarks around that and bring it home in a little bit different way. But the federal assessment of the states, all states, performance in achieving the outcomes for a child welfare agency is a really rigorous process. And it begins with a round, and we are beginning our round 4. And to give you some sense of the scope of it, we started about a year ago, and you'll probably remember that with the Court Improvement Project. I know that many of you have participated in it. And then by the time you get your final grades, if you will, from the federal government, the Children's Bureau, you'll have 3.5 years to implement solutions to achieve the targets in areas that need improvement. So it's a long, protracted endeavor. It's a sober endeavor, and we're really looking forward to it. And I want to tell you today, my update is we're really well positioned for success going forward. And part of that is because we did a lot of work a year ago. And a lot of that work was led by Jamie Bernstein. So I want to give a nod to Jamie. She's a core team member on this team. And a lot of times when you get a position like that, it can be a sort of a token position. You need somebody, you plug somebody in, and people can treat it that way, but Jamie certainly didn't treat it that way. Jamie has been providing guidance and support to ensure the state's success in these outcomes. She's participated in all the planning meetings. She's assessed data. She was a secondary reviewer on the case reviews. You have to read case reviews to understand what's going on because you can't always pull it from the data. And she's reading that stuff. She's co-authoring products with us. I mean, that is a hands-on leadership approach to really getting the goals accomplished. She's preparing for the meeting. She's engaging the stakeholders. She's making decisions. She's really moving the ideas from the work groups that she puts together into action. That's actionable stuff, Jamie. And look, you don't have to take it from old Dr. Brock. Because the Children's Bureau came and they saw it with their on-site review. And they could see how active she was. They could see how engaged the judiciary was in their interviews with the federal government. And they're so impressed, they're taking her leadership approach and holding it up as a national model for every other state child welfare. Say, if you don't do it Jamie's way, you can't get it done. Because it's that important. And so thank you, Jamie, for all your work, and thank you for this group. Thank you for all your participation. And we're really looking forward to working with you over the next 3.5 years to get to where we need to be. Let's see. The CFSR timeline. So we started about a year ago, and we We started with our data profile. These are simple metrics, broad child welfare outcomes. And then you have to go to a self-assessment. The feds ask the state to go do a self-assessment, and you look at your qualitative data, you look at your quantitative data, you do stakeholder interviews, you gather all this information, and you give a sober assessment of where you're doing well and what needs to improve. You turn that in, and then the federal government goes under what's called a period of review. And this period of review will expand some time. They're in it now. But previous to doing that, as I said before, the feds will come and do an on-site review with you, and they'll review some cases, and they'll interview all your stakeholders, and they'll gather information, and they'll take everything you sent them, and they'll assess that soberly, and they'll come back and they'll eventually give you your grade. Right now, we're waiting on our grade. And once we get our grade, we have 90 days to prepare our response to the grade and talk about the tactics and strategies that we're going to apply to achieve the improvement that they need to meet their standards or our standards for child welfare outcomes. And then we'll have some time in, once we agree on where we want to go and how we want to get there, we have that 3.5 years to achieve those ends. We're well positioned, I think. We have a pretty good sense of what they're going to ask us to improve upon. We've got some strategies in mind. We're going to work with our stakeholders and define our tactics and then go out and implement. And I want to go back one more time, because one of the things I want to, the takeaway I want you to get today is you can do data analysis, and you can be very sober, and you can be methodical, and you can have accurate insight from that and make some decisions about what you need to do. You can even come up with some good solutions. But the one thing that's also necessary is you have to implement those, and you have to do that effectively. That's the action piece. You can have the answers, but if you don't put the solutions into place and you don't do it effectively, you're never going to get to where you want to go. You have to have both. And this team here, I know, has already done some assessment. You've got some pilots coming up. Jamie's got some more work for you to do. And I know that you're going to roll your sleeves up and get it done. And CPS is going to do their side too. And HHSC has to do their side too. And everybody else who's involved has to do their work. So I'm talking about good, solid analysis, coming up with solutions, and putting together the infrastructure and the team that can go out and carry it out. If you've got those three things, you're well positioned for success, and I think that's where we are today. So you may remember, maybe you participated, and I'm sure you did, there was a survey done with the Court Improvement Project. And some of the results of that survey were the three greatest challenges that that group felt like CPS was faced with. And that was back in October of 2023, so about a year ago. Part of that was your workforce. We're worried about your workforce. How are you going to get to an effective and stable and maintain an effective and stable workforce with all of the challenges that you have? The other was really resources. Really infrastructure around, you've got a lot of kids coming in, really complex behavioral health needs. Do you have the infrastructure and the service array that you need to meet those needs? Those are challenges. How are you going to get those things done? Well, I want to tell you, Commissioner Muth and her way forward is addressing these issues head on. There's one of those tenets of that plan is, well, an effective, talented workforce be maintained to meet the needs of the casework demands. She went out, hired directors who can put themselves wholly on that subject and try and figure out what are the ideal candidates for this kind of work. What kind of tactics can you apply to recruitment? Streamline your HR process, make sure that you can fill vacancies timely, and make sure they're trained right. Hold them accountable and give them the supervision and support that they need. She started in CPI and the investigations, and now she's extrapolated it out to the other programs. We're all working on our tactics to identify the ideal candidates for each program, get out there, recruit them, get them hired, get them trained, give them the support they need. And by God, look after them. And that was part of the feedback from the survey. Everybody talks about child watch. People are worried about child watch. And what toll is that taking on your caseworkers? Is that running people off? Are they distracted from other business they need to be attending to with Child Watch? It's a big problem, Brock. How are you going to get that fixed? You know, that was your concern. And I want to talk a little bit about the work that you've done, work that's in your court, work that's in our court. And Child Watch is a very small population, but a very big problem. But it's a microcosm of the kinds of concerns that came from the survey. It's tough on staff. It's tough on kids. The reason why they're there is because you don't have the service array that you need. How are you going to fix those kinds of issues? Well, you do it through sober analysis, do it through root cause of the drivers of the problem. You design solutions for those. You put implementation plans together, and then you roll up your sleeves and you go to work. Let me tell you my story now. So, well, before I do that, I want to talk about the service array. As I scroll down in my notes, just give me a second here. The service array, how are you going to handle that? Well, there's lots of ways to do it. And some of you have heard about T3C, which is Texas Child Center Care. That's why we call it T3C, because it's a mouthful. Texas Child Center Care. Texas Child Center Care is the idea that you've got to do a good assessment of youth when they come in to understand what their needs are. And then you have to have a service array that will meet those needs. And it doesn't one size fit all. You've got to do a tailored assessment and come up with specific service care packages that providers can build service arrays to and apply to those youth to meet those needs so that they can be stable and we can put them in the least restrictive environments and help them to heal and help them to thrive and then eventually reach permanency. Well, that's a lot of words, but how do you get that done? And one of the ways you do it is you adjust your rate setting. You adjust your rates. You put it in there where what it costs to deliver those services will pay. And we've got that done. We've got the tool just about ready to roll out. We're really excited about this T3C initiative because not only do we think we can do a better assessment up front, we think that we can focus providers to build the service array that will allow us to deliver those service packages at the cost that it costs. Now you've got people incentivized to get into the game. I think that's really going to help us. Happy to answer any questions that you have when I'm finished. Put your money where your mouth is. You put $8 million in transition grants so that people can get into those kinds of service arrays. They're incentivized to get into that game. They're incentivized to come up with those service arrays. We think we've got something going there. You mentioned Luann Southern a minute ago. Luann Southern's office is right next to mine. I've known Luann for over 15 years. She's our chief behavioral health strategist. She's trying to leverage all that she can from HHSC, make sure that we've got everything that we can get to help our kids to get these behavioral services. So we really feel like some of the infrastructure, another of the themes that came from the survey, in place so that we can do a better job and get to these outcomes that we want. I'll talk briefly about Child Watch. In June 2021, we had a monthly average census of youth in Child Watch at 400. That was about the height of where we had it. In June 2022, we cut that number to 250. Now, that's a pretty good improvement. Most students of continuous quality improvement would agree that that kind of improvement, almost 50%, is remarkable, but we brought incredible resources to bear on that. We put in $20 million of capacity grants that centered on qualified residential treatment programs, intensive psychiatric stabilization programs, all geared to stabilize youth with really complex behavioral health needs, get them into less restrictive settings, get them stabilized so that they can continue to meet those settings, and then move into lesser and lesser restrictive settings, hopefully back down into a foster home. We were $20 million into treatment family foster homes, another good model. We hired clinical coordinators, kids that were in Child Watch. Once we got them into a placement, clinical coordinators followed them for 90 days, do wraparound services, make sure that they're doing everything that they can do to preserve that placement so that that youth doesn't come back into child watch. We had about 200 in June. Well, from the 250 and 22, we got down to January of this year to about 100. Really focusing on these 100 youth. And you got to think it's really not 100. That's a monthly average. Your movement, it's a rolling average. Kids come in, kids come out of that. And we've got to focus on what are the needs of those kids? What placements do we have? Move kids out of placements that can't handle them, that don't need that placement anymore. You know, make the most value of the resources that you have. We streamlined our placement processes. We started to really make some gains. Well, in March the 9th, we started to change our metric to understand how well we were doing to a daily metric. And so we start to monitor how many kids do we have today? How many kids do we have today? On March the 9th, we had about 60 kids in child watch. Erica came to me and she said, Brock, 90 days from now, I want 10 kids in child watch. And I didn't say this, but I thought, I don't think so. You're not gonna get to 10. I just don't see how you can do it. We've been at this 60-50 for so long. I really think we've done all that we can do. But what I did say was, yes, ma'am, we'll get right on that. And you know, like Jamie did, Erica did the same thing. I mean, active leadership. She took this on. She jumped into this, and let me tell you, they started doing staffings for all of the youth in child watch, the 60, say, what do they need? Where can we put them? Let's get this going. So she established, made the mandate, every region, every day, certainly every week, you're going to start staffing the kids in your region that are in child watch. And we're going to have these staffings, they're regular meetings. And Erica said, I'm going to be there. She said, the regional director, you're going to be there. And she said, Brock, you're going to be there. The director of field is going to be there. Director of permanency is going to be there. Director of conservatorship is going to be there. We're going to be there every day, and we're going to bring the caseworkers, but we're going to bring the behavioral health specialists. We're going to bring the well-being specialists. We're going to bring the disability specialists. We're going to bring in the nurse consultants. We're going to bring in placement folks. We're going to bring in the specialized placement folks. We're going to bring in everybody who has a stake in this, and that's just about everybody. You might have 50, 60 people, and you're going to probably staff 7 or 8 kids in an hour, hour and a half, 2 hours. And you're going to keep doing it until we get down to 10. And what we found with those meetings were we had some inefficiencies in communication. We weren't delegating responsibilities and tasks appropriately, and that we were able to make adjustments over the first month. It was remarkable to see the improvement of the work groups over time. And part of the delegation of the roles and responsibilities was, don't put anything else on that caseworker. If you hear something that's in your domain, nurse consultant, you jump out there and say, I've got that task. If you hear something disability specialist that belongs to you, you jump out and get that task. You know, I have the medical behavioral teams. My teams were there. My director was there. I was there. We're there and we're listening, and our teams are there, and we're on camera and we're grabbing stuff and we're going to it. And then throughout the day, you update us on your task. And if I haven't heard from you, well, Rob's going to reach out, tap you on the shoulder, say, well, where are we at with this task? We got to get this thing going, because I guarantee you, we're going to be in a meeting tomorrow. And if we're still in child watch, we have to explain where we are with this case. Now, 60 down to 10 sounds like, well, that's 50. But in reality, you've got kids coming in every day. So then we had to shift to prevention. So then we started shifting our attention to kids that were in placements that didn't have a placement, but they had a placement discharge. And if they don't have a placement at discharge, they come into child watch. So now you've got to staff those guys. They kept it up over 90 days and they got below 10. Yesterday we had 7. Had 7 kids in child watch. Statewide. That comes at a huge cost. Don't get me wrong. When you get 60 people on a meeting, you're talking thousands of hours over 90 days, at least probably 17,000 person hours dedicated to that effort. 2,300 youth were staffed, over 600 staffings. It's a lot of work, but it got done. It is achievable. And it wasn't just, hey, Doc, I'd like to get it from 60 to 10. That was another example of leadership taking responsibility, rolling up their sleeves, putting in the work, and getting it done. We can do our part. I know you can do yours. Together, we're going to see a lot of success in these next few years. And I can't tell you how proud I am to be part of it. You know, I wasn't a caseworker, and I didn't find placements for it. Well, I found placement for one of those kids, but one out of 2,300 maybe, right? But everybody else was doing the work, and I was just feeding them the data and trying to help with the performance and trying to capture things as it went along. Just to sit on the sidelines and watch it was enough for me. And I can bring my talents to bear in lots of other ways. I like to think to myself, I could do lots of other things besides work in child welfare. I'm gonna leave you with this last little story. I came to child welfare kind of by accident. I was a university associate professor for a long time, and I wanted to come back to Texas, and anyway, a guy hired me to be a research specialist, and I took it on. Well, over time, I fell in love with the mission, and then something funny happened. I had a couple of kids of my own. And so when my daughter was about 6 years old, she sat up on a couch with me, and, you know, we're watching, as you do, if you have kids, you watch kids shows, and this was Hometown Heroes. And Hometown Heroes has a whole cast of characters, you know, firemen, policemen, pizza guy, doctors, nurses, you know, the things that kids think about. She said, "What do you do, Daddy?" And I thought, how do I tell her what I do? And I said, "Hey man, I'll take care of all the kids who don't have mamas and daddies who will." And a 6-year-old can understand that. And I was very proud to be able to say that. And it's my privilege to work for y'all. It's my privilege to be in this business, and I love it. And I know that you do too. And I appreciate you listening to me. If you have any questions, I'm happy to entertain.
Questions, discussion for Dr. Boudreaux?
Can I add something to what Brock just said? Brock just did an awesome job presenting all that. One thing I do want you all to know about the work that we've done to bring down the number of children that are in child watch and without placement is the efforts that have been going on are Herculean. I think that the reality is that Herculean effort is a symptom of something that's much bigger in this state. The needs of children with mental health challenges in this state, as you all know so well, and you see in your courts every day, are greater than the state's capacity right now to meet them. And I don't blame that on the system. The needs of children have changed dramatically, I feel like, in the last 5 years, and the systems haven't caught up with them yet. So in addition to the work that Brock's talking about and the Herculean efforts that staff are making to get kids placed in the right place with the services that they need, we are also working very, very closely with the Department of Juvenile Justice and the Department of Health and Human Services Commission to design a future plan for what does the state need? What do we need to do? We're looking specifically at what do we need to do to make sure that children don't come into our care who don't belong in our care, or that if they're in our care and they need services, they can get them and so they don't end up without a placement. But in addition to that, we are a very active partner in trying to figure out what do the children of this state need services wide. There's a children's mental health strategic plan that's being developed. There's a whole lot of momentum around providing those services to children that are bigger than us. The reality is our mission is to protect children who've been abused and neglected. But there are children in our care that they have not been abused or neglected. They cannot receive the services that they need. And that's something that the state is really trying to figure out. How do they step up and how do we better solve this problem? And so I just want to acknowledge that elephant in the room. I think for a long time, people felt like because we had 400 kids at one time without placement, that was a failure on the department, and partially probably so. but not all of it. Some of it was that the needs of the children in this state are exceeding our capacity to meet those needs. And we need to think creatively and frankly, quickly to come up with those solutions. Some solutions that we talk about are very long term. And that's just gonna take longer than we have for these kids. Having Luann on our team is a huge boon. Having Trina Ida in that role before has been very helpful. We're really dedicated to being an active partner in addressing children's mental health needs in this state. And we know that you guys are integral in that work and you see it every day in your courtrooms. And so we want to continue to partner with y'all as we find solutions for these really challenging problems.
Okay, thank you for that, Jennifer. Now, again, any questions, discussion about the department update? Yes.
Thank you, Judge. No, I would just like to make a comment that this, you said, Jennifer, the work is Herculean. It is. And what you all have accomplished is outstanding. And other states are taking notice. They want to know, how did Texas do it on children without placement? And Texas has become a national model of how to do things well. And I'm really proud of that. I come from Casey, so I have a national landscape picture. So I really have the opportunity to measure Texas against every other state. There we go. And really, this state has set the standard in so many ways in safely keeping children out of the system and doing the kinds of work like reducing the number of children in unlicensed placements. And I just want to congratulate the department for the amazing work that it's done. Jennifer, you and Commissioner Muth have built a rock star leadership team. And that's why this is happening. And this is why you've become a national model in so many ways.
I appreciate your comments about the mental health problems. I'm a juvenile court as well as hearing CPS cases in my court. And perhaps the greatest limiting factor in what I can do for my kids, both in juvenile court and in CPS court, and of course, we got that dual status mixed in there too, is providing mental health services. Again, I'm in a small, very small town, a rural jurisdiction. Our motion for continuance in our local rules, my mama cow is down. Right? So that's one of our rules. So I live in a rural jurisdiction. We do not have access to those services. In fact, sometimes I have to make dispositions. I have to make commitments to TYC simply because I have nowhere else to send this profoundly mentally ill child. So don't forget about us little people when you're making your rules.
JJD is not letting us, and we've been working closely with the juvenile,
Thank you.
the probation offices around the state.
Other comments, questions? Okay, well, thanks to you both, Brock and Jennifer, for the good update. Getting down to 7 is really quite a feat. I guess the challenge for us here is, as you say, looking forward, how do we keep the number that small, and how do we stem the tide of kids coming into that pool? So thank you for what you've been doing. Thank you for digging in and really figuring out new ways to approach old problems. So appreciate you and appreciate the update.
And let me just comment. First of all, I apologize for being late.
I was going to say hello and welcome,
Thank
welcome
you.
Justice Wehrman.
I was at another meeting for the State Bar of Texas, so it was an important meeting, but I'm certainly sorry I was late. And I want to thank you all. I'm sorry that I missed your update. I think I always really appreciate the department and what you do, and I feel like that you always get you get a lot of criticism, and I think it's a tough thing for you to have to endure. And I hope you know that the court certainly appreciates what all you do. Certainly not, and I certainly don't mean from a perspective of being biased one way or the other, but we do appreciate what you do. And I know that you have to go through a lot of criticism, so thank you. And now that we can just keep going where we were. You know.
Glad you're here. Also, welcome Luann. We said a few words about you before you arrived, so maybe someone will tell you on the break what we. They were all good. They were all good. Okay, so what I'd like to do now is jump back to a little small piece of business before we get back to our normal meeting where we'll have Jamie giving us the commission update. So let's take care of minutes really quickly. These are behind tab 2 in your notebook. They were also emailed earlier in the week. So I'll be taking votes before we have someone move on the minutes. Want to know if anyone had any correction to offer on them. Okay. Hearing none, now let's move to see if we have a motion to adopt the minutes from the May 2024 meetings.
I move.
And second,
Second.
thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, minutes are adopted. Good and easy. And now it's my pleasure to turn the meeting over to Jamie. I second everything that Brock said about how impressive it is to work beside you and watch you pour so much into this work. So thank you again for what you do. And today, Jamie's talk will focus on the commission's plan for the upcoming fiscal year. So you have the floor.
Wonderful. And I think we'll get the slides up here in a minute. We have a PowerPoint presentation that shows all of our strategies and proposed budget for the coming fiscal year, which is around the corner on October 1st. And I want to start by thanking you all for your input in May and also for the committee members who helped formulate these strategies. And I would be remiss if I didn't thank the team for a tremendous amount of hard work that goes into formulating our plans for the coming fiscal year. And on a personal note, Dylan, your DNA is all over this. And I'll say from the outset that they're big shoes to fill. You'll be sorely missed. We're very proud of you. But we do intend to maintain the lofty goals that we have for the strategic plan, even in Dylan's absence. So we're going to have to find that unicorn that can help us cover all these bases. So I wanted to lead with that. So this is the 5 goals that we have in our current strategic plan. We have up through 2026 for this current strategic plan, and you'll see we'll put together a strategic planning committee when it's time for a new one. But these are the 5 core goals that we center all of our work in, and each of the strategies fit into one of these 5 goals. So these have not changed, but I'm just including them here for reference. And this is the structure that we have. The first goal is collaboration. It does not have a committee behind it. The other 4 do. There are standing committees for systems improvement, legal practice and process, which we call LPT, training and data. And then underneath it, you'll see all the strategies that fit in each of these goals. So we'll go through them. We're not going to talk about each strategy. I know that can be a little bit too in the weeds. We're certainly available and we'll pause at the end to take questions that you have on any of them. If you don't hear about your favorite project today, it's because it's going forward in the same fashion. We haven't made any changes to the strategy. We're going to continue the plans that we already have in place and continue to build on the work that we've already done. But the things we're going to talk to you about are the new things or the things that are changing. And that's how we wanted to spend our time with you today. So this is goal 1, collaboration, which I'm going to cover and then hopefully pass it over to the team to do the rest of the heavy lifting. And I'm going to highlight 2 of these strategies. The first relates to communication, and I wanted to share that we do plan in this fiscal year to update the Children's Commission website in both the content and in catering to different audiences. So we're thinking about things like maybe having a tab for parents or a tab for youth so that they can easily access the resources that are most relevant to them. We want to make our website as user-friendly as possible. And we create all these resources for them to be used. So we want to make sure we have a communication medium that is helpful to the end user. And to that end, if you have input, if you've ever been on there and been like, I can't find this thing, please let us know. Send us those notes because we're going to do a top to bottom comprehensive look at our website. And then I do want to build on the comments that Brock made, and I'll be blushing for quite some time for your very kind words. It was really nice of you. I'll be honest and say I've learned a lot about the process, and it's been a great education for me. And I know that we have plenty of work to do, and I've had the opportunity to have a seat at the table every step of the way. And I appreciate the leadership's position in including myself and Dylan and the judges and the lawyers in the process in a very meaningful way and really being open to the feedback. So it's been very mutually beneficial, and I want to thank you for that. So as Brock said, we began round 4 in this past fiscal year that we're just finishing, and we do expect to get that final report any month now in the coming days, in this fall for sure, which will eventually lead to a program improvement plan for the areas that were not found in substantial conformity by the feds. And this process includes several components. As Brock alluded to, there's a statewide assessment that we were able to provide input on. There's a data profile. There's a case review. They're pulling cases and doing quality assurance on them. They do it all the time, but they had to pull some specifically for the CFSR. And then, of course, the stakeholder interviews that were referenced. And in this round in particular, the Administration for Children and Families has put an increased emphasis on legal and judicial involvement in the CFSR process, and we're working closely to develop we will work closely to work on the PIP strategies. And I want to share the 2 ideas that we anticipate to not be found in substantial conformity that will most likely impact the legal system that the department and I have kind of generated these ideas to propose for the PIP if we end up not being in conformity in these areas. And in federal language, these both relate to the case review process, which is a systemic factor. The first one, for the beginning of time, there has always been kind of an agree to disagree on the way we file for termination in Texas. Pleading in the alternative for removal and for termination is something that the feds are not supportive of, and they would like to see Texas change. And I want to applaud Justice Lehrman and Justice Huddle, because since they came on board at the Children's Commission, they have always created a culture of just because there's the way we've always done things, that doesn't mean it's the right thing to do. And in that vein, we have kind of gone back to the drawing board and had a conversation that we don't necessarily have data to support this practice either way, whether it has an impact on permanency or not. And so one thing we would like to propose is a pilot with 1 or 2 jurisdictions to try just filing for removal at the beginning of a case. And when the circumstances change, that it's now leaning towards termination, then there would either be a new pleading or maybe a motion. We really have to work with whatever jurisdiction is open to this idea to see what it's going to look like. It's going to involve everybody in the case. The prosecutors will have a big role in this, the ad litems, the caseworkers, service is a big thing. But I think the idea is that parents will maybe perhaps feel that they're not always on their heels if the termination petition is not up against them from the outset of the case. So it's something we're willing to explore. And I think we have at least one judge who might be interested in trying this out with us. And we'll learn how it impacts the cases. And obviously we want to take it very seriously because we don't want to delay permanency for children and families. The second one relates to caregiver engagement. During the stakeholder interviews, which I was able to sit in on all 20 plus of them with over 200 people, they asked almost every stakeholder group, how do caregivers hear about court hearings? For almost every group that they asked, they got a different answer. It was the CPS caseworker, it was the SSCC caseworker, it was the prosecutor, it was the judge's automatic notification system. It's not uniform, and what the notification says is not uniform. And then perhaps what happens in court is not uniform. So we propose having a roundtable to talk about this issue of caregiver engagement, when and how it's appropriate to engage caregivers. Is an intervention needed? What kind of questions is the judge asking in the court hearing? So there's a lot of items that we need to explore in this potential strategy. But I think that will be the second pilot that we will work on with some jurisdictions, and hopefully we'll get 2 or 3 volunteers to participate in that pilot. So those are the 2 ideas. Of course, we don't have a final report yet. We don't have a PIP yet, but that type of project would take a long time to get off the ground. And so we're starting the process of building the idea now. And with that, we're going to move on to systems improvement. And I'm going to turn it over to Amy.
Good morning. So I'm going to start with the trauma-informed My words just escaped me. A strategy, I'm so sorry. And this is related to the Consortium for Trauma-Informed Court Practices. So this is a new judicial forum that is designated to be informal and a safe space for judicial discussion and education. And it's really going to be focused on trauma-informed and trauma-responsive court practices. So it's going to meet virtually every other month, and this consortium is going to be chaired by Judge Carlos Villalon of the Child Protection Court of the Rio Grande Valley. And it's going to have 4 judges who had participated in the recent trauma-informed courts pilot. So we have judges Linda Dunson, Judge Angela Graves Harrington, Judge Andrea James, and Judge Cheryl Vaughn. And they really wanted to keep the momentum going from that pilot and create this space for our judges and other efforts to invite discussion, provide education, and really share resources. The next strategy I'm going to talk about is our prevention strategy. And this one has been a lot of fun as it has kind of involved the entire commission. So in this prevention space, we are kind of doing a statewide tour on Texas Family First and reasonable efforts. So many of you know the Texas Family First pilot that the department has launched, and the commission, along with our partners at DFPS, are going to the pilot regions that have this court pilot. And it's the area around San Antonio, Lubbock, Fort Worth, and Abilene have been the areas that we went and did this training. And so it's been a 6-hour training. One department and our provider presents on the TFF, and then we get to present on reasonable efforts. And it has gone really well. We've gotten really positive feedback, and the pilot is actually expanding. And so it's going to be going into Bear and Harris. We are not training quite yet on that piece as it's kind of rolling out. So the commission is going to be supporting DFPS and the legal community during the rollout to make sure that that is as smooth as transition as possible and that the pilot can be as successful as it has been in our other regions. In the meantime, the fund isn't stopping just with TFF. We're going to continue our roadshow, and we're going to hit all of the other regions that may not have TFF and talk about reasonable efforts. We're also exploring a partnership with the Child Protection Law Section, and we're going to explore a way to offer these additional child welfare trainings. If we're going to be in the regions and we have attorneys and judges in front of us, let's see who else we can, train. What are the topics we can train on? So we're in kind of discussions to explore what that might look like. Our first stop of the fall will be in 6B, which is kind of the area around Houston. And this winter, we're looking forward to going to El Paso and Midland. So lots of travel, but it's kind of neat to see different parts of the state. When we went to Abilene, I was like, oh, it's actually really pretty here. So felt bad, Abilene. I didn't know you before, but now I do. And then lastly, the last strategy is for education. There's been a lot of focus on older youth and their transition to independence. And so the commission wants to continue not only our partnerships with all of the great stakeholders and providers to assist these youth as they transition. And so one focus we want to look at is the transition to higher ed. In 2017, there was a higher education liaison guide for those professionals who work in higher education, really guiding them on how to support our young adults who are transitioning into this kind of new life of independence. And so we're going to work with some partners at the Education Reach for Texans and hopefully give this a great revised kind of judge and update it. How many times you go to look at a site and it's bad. So we want to just put a new fresh face and then train on it and really put it out there and let these educators know, hey, this is a great resource. Please utilize it and please use it. And unfortunately, Jamie is not off the hook because she is my partner on systems improvement. So I'm going to pass it back to you.
Okay, I'm going to make a brief note on strategy 13 here regarding community-based care. A lot of this work does not live at the Children's Commission, but we're still very involved with it. I am honored to serve on what I call the new PPP, the Partnerships for Children and Families Committee, the PCFC. And that's a committee that oversees, it's an advisory body. It oversees a lot of work to give recommendations for improvement to the department. And so I hope to engage other lawyers and judges in that committee and subcommittee work. And also we'll continue to support the legal community in the rollout of community-based care and the soonest example of that is I will be partnering with the Alliance on a legal convening in the Rio Grande Valley to kind of help them with readiness and to talk about community-based care. And the last one I'm going to talk about is strategy 14 here, which those of you who know me know this is very near and dear to my heart, which is the dual status and juvenile justice work. And we did initiate a new juvenile justice committee in fiscal year 2024. And I'm excited to share that we did request support from the legislature to embark on juvenile justice and hire a staff attorney to perform the following duties in furtherance of supporting our juvenile courts. Organizing online and in-person training events for judges designed to address key legal issues and strategies to overcome common barriers, identifying judicial subject matter experts on issues such as trafficking or dual status youth, and perhaps creating a directory for judges to connect and educate with one another, creating tools and resources that would support increased knowledge and the improved administration of juvenile justice cases, distributing communiques to the legal community regarding emerging issues and changes to law, policy, and practice, and developing and strengthening partnerships between agencies and the courts, and of course, improving cross-system collaboration, which is what this work is all about. So I'll keep you posted on all of that, but we have included an exceptional item request in the budget. And with that, we will turn over to legal process and practice, and Dylan and Renee.
Thank you, Amy. So I wanted to update and highlight just a couple of strategies under legal process and practice. The first is our legal representation committee. Legal representation committee over the spring and summer really wanted to identify what the focus of their work in FY 2025 would be. And what they settled on was trying to enhance and support pre-petition representation of parents and families before they enter the system. And what we did at our last meetings is try to identify what projects could we do as a legal representation committee to support those efforts. And the three that we've come up with for FY 2025 is to develop an implementation guide for future programs based on what we've learned from national models, as well as the evaluation that was done of the McLennan County pilot pre-petition representation program, so that when new programs start, they don't have to start from scratch. They can sort of hit the ground running with the lessons that we've already learned. The second project that the committee identified was to develop a sample PowerPoint or presentation regarding the benefits that we know accrue from pre-petition representation. So when people who are interested in starting those programs speak to funders or county commissioners, that they have something that they can present about why this program is effective. And then the last is to develop a sample memorandum of understanding between a program and DFPS so that they can share the information they need to make a pre-petition program successful. The other strategy that I wanted to highlight is our standards of representation. This group is dedicated to drafting standards of representation for attorneys representing parents and children. We got into, I think, a pretty good groove over FY 2024 of figuring out how we wanted to develop those standards. We've been making a lot of progress. At our last meeting, we finished phase 1 of standards and have moved on to phase 2. We have an upcoming meeting September 26th and 27th. We'll continue to work on drafting phase 2 of the standards, which covers the investigatory phase, and we'll move on to phase 3, which covers the preparatory phase. Those are 3 out of the 6 phases, and Jamie always makes fun of me, but I'm cautiously optimistic that we might actually get to finish all the phases in FY 2025. I don't want to jinx anything, but I think it's possible. We will have 2 virtual meetings in FY 2025, one in November and one in June, and we'll have 2 in-person meetings, one in February and then one again in September. And now I want to turn it over to Renee to highlight our work on attorneys representing the department.
Thank you, Dylan. So we do have our DFPS representation subcommittee. They meet on an ad hoc basis, and typically they focus on trying to update our toolkit for attorneys representing the department in child welfare cases. But one of the things that we'll be doing also in FY 25 is that they will also be serving as our sounding board for the agenda setting for the TDCAA, which is the Texas District and County Attorneys Association, Prosecuting Crimes Against Children Conference. They are including a child welfare track of up to 12 hours of MCLE related to child welfare law. And this will be the 3rd time that they've included a child welfare track in their training. So our first was in 2018. Then we were able to do so in 2023, and 2025 will be our 3rd collaboration with TDCAA. So we will be meeting soon in order to discuss potential speakers and agenda setting. Moving on to our parent resource work group, we do have some subgroups. And so the main focus of next year is one, you've heard us talk about our pre-litigation guide. As we're getting closer to this legislative year, we want to hold on to that, make sure that we include all final updates with regard to changes in the statutory changes that might be there that are pertinent to parents and to caregivers. This guide is focused on, as we said, pre-litigation, so anything up until before the filing of a case. We also have a parent resource guide, which has been around for quite some time. That does focus more on the cases that have already been filed. So that is due for an update as well, and that will be completed in the next year. And then finally, we do have our subgroup that will be focused on our parent materials, and we are trying to finish up the parent voice videos to complement those youth voice videos that were done a few years ago. With that, I will pass it back to Dylan to discuss our mediation strategy.
Thank you, Renee. So our mediation work group had been focused on developing a toolkit for mediators mediating child welfare cases, but they've moved away from that particular strategy. Instead, want to devote their focus on developing checklists for both mediators and attorneys about how to best conduct mediation, and then for lawyers, how to get the most out of the mediation process. So they've identified 8 of these checklists, and we're in the process of drafting them and finalizing them. We hope to get those finished and ready for distribution in FY 2025. In addition to that project, the mediation work group also wants to continue to develop webinars to help people understand and get the most out of mediation. We want to focus particularly on participation of non-parties in mediation, since that's a very big factor often in child welfare mediations, as well as mediations that may involve incarcerated parents, because those are specifically unique circumstances that need a little bit more education. The last strategy that I wanted to highlight today is the work of our Legislation and Policy Resource Committee. Our committee has been meeting over the summer to develop legislative recommendations that we'll talk about it a little bit more later in the presentation. Those recommendations were presented to the Texas Judicial Council Civil Justice Committee on September 9th. They received a very positive feedback from that committee. We'll talk about them a little bit later today, and we hope to send them to the full Texas Judicial Council on September 27th. For the remainder of FY 2025, we anticipate that the Legislation and Policy Resource Committee will continue to meet as needed to prepare for the upcoming 89th legislative session as to how to sort of best serve as a resource to the legislature during session. So we don't have a set schedule of meetings, but it's going to be an as needed basis. And that concludes the LPP update, and I'll turn it over to Milbury to update us on training.
Thank you. I will turn it over to Renita.
Thank you, Milbury and Dylan. The first strategy that we want to talk about with regard to training is actually strategy 31, which is our trial skills training. This year, we are hosting our pilot program on contested hearing practices, and we do plan on trying to take the feedback that we receive from participants and from our faculty and continuing to hone in and really make that a great premier training. We are currently set for our training on September 18th for our virtual day, and we will have 2 in-person days on September 25th and 26th in Dallas, Texas. So 21 students will be participating in this training, and it includes 5 new lectures. As we said, this is on contested hearing practices, so we are focusing more on building the attorney-client relationship, knowing your required burdens of proof and understanding the reasonable efforts findings that are required for every hearing, preparing for your initial contested hearing, and child welfare bench trials, and also motion practice throughout the life of a case. So not just pretrial motions, but what you should be considering to file as the case moves on. So we are very excited about this, and we are hoping to put on a second contested hearing practices TST in 2025. Moving on, we have a strategy called Assistance to Local Jurisdictions. This had previously lived under our communications strategy. We have moved this over to training, and we're hoping that once this is approved, this is going to focus more on providing assistance to local jurisdictions in the sense that we will be able to provide training support, as we have recently in January with Williamson County. We had reached out, they had reached out to us, and Williamson County Court #1 did ask us to help put on a 101 training. It is our intent to be able to provide that assistance to more jurisdictions who are wanting to put on trainings, who may just need that assistance with either agenda setting or with identifying speakers, or potentially needing some financial needs being met in order for those trainings to occur. So once that is approved, we will develop parameters for an application process, which could extend to planning, financial, and other support as needed for those trainings. And with that, I will pass it back to Milbrey to discuss our scholarship fund.
Thanks so much, Renee, and good morning, everybody. The training committee has 2 additional priorities for fiscal year 2025. The first one is a general judicial scholarship. This falls under strategy number 33. We would like to develop a general judicial scholarship fund. And if approved by the commissioners, we'll develop parameters and an application for these funds, a lot like the assistance to local jurisdiction strategy that Renee just mentioned. The general judicial scholarship funds would be used to reimburse conference registration fees for judges who need financial support in order to attend recognized state and national conferences on child welfare matters. These funds would be available for trainings that aren't already addressed in the current commission scholarship offerings, such as NACC or NCJ, FCJ. One example of this is that the commission is occasionally contacted by judges who have been invited to speak at a conference, but they don't have the funds available to participate in otherwise. So the idea is that, again, we would develop parameters and an application and then publicize this so that judges have the opportunity to attend these conferences that are not covered by the current commission scholarships. The second strategy that I want to talk to y'all about is number 30. This is about providing online content. Our newest way to address training needs and provide education is through podcasts. We are going to be calling these the Children's Commission Conversations. It's taken us a while to build these, but we're about to launch them. We taped our first pilot episode in late August. We interviewed Jamie. That interview is going to be an overview of the Children's Commission and our resources. We'll send out an announcement when we have a handful of them taped and ready to go on the website. Our idea is that we'll release these in batches. We're in the planning stages for episodes on sibling access, which will be of particular interest to attorneys ad litem. Also pre-petition advocacy for parents, so that parents' attorneys have a podcast that's focused on something that will be helpful for them. And we're also in communication with the department to develop an episode with department staff. So stay tuned for podcasts, and that concludes the training committee report.
Back to you, Dylan, on data.
Thank you, Jamie. So I wanted to highlight the work of our data committee for FY 2025, and I really want to thank both the Office of Court Administration and DFPS. They have been really responsive to our data committee's requests, and I think we've been able to pull a lot of unique data and answer a lot of questions that the data committee has had as they try to identify questions and trends that they want to look into to help understand what's going on in the child welfare system. For this fiscal year, the data committee didn't settle on any one major project. Instead, they want to focus on utilizing the existing data that exists from the department and OCA to try to make existing commission projects more data enhanced. And particularly, I think the improvements that have been made to CPCMS have made it a more robust and unique source of data. And the committee really wants to review CPCMS and learn what is that unique data that's in CPCMS and how can we use that to inform and improve commission projects. The other project that I want to highlight is, of course, our annual data presentation at the Child Welfare Judges Conference. We will share, the department will be sharing statewide data from DFPS leadership so that that process that leads to the data outcomes can be presented with a greater understanding of how those outcomes occur and the intersection between law, policy, practice, and data. Key topics of that presentation will be safety, permanency, and well-being outcomes at the state level. And then once that presentation concludes, there'll be regional breakouts with CPS regional directors, CPI regional directors, regional systems improvement specialists, and SSC representatives to examine and discuss regional data with an eye towards specifically improving outcomes for children and families. And then lastly, I wanted to highlight that we will continue to support the child protection case management system with our advisory council. It's our judges and court coordinators who review the CPCMS system with the eye to making enhancements. That council will continue to meet quarterly to make sure that that system is as helpful as it can to judges and also is accurate in tracking the data that we need to make sure that we can present robust and accurate data when we extract data from the CPCMS system. And that concludes the data committee update. Thank you, Jamie.
I should have mentioned before that if you want updates on things that we've done since the May meeting, that's in your notebook behind tab 3. We're just talking in the presentation about our plans for FY25. So Patrick's a little under the weather hanging out there in the corner, so I'm gonna do my best to get through the budget, but if any questions come up, I will definitely be deferring to him. So this is our proposed budget, and of course, as a good executive director, I have to say it's contingent on receiving continued funding from the Federal Court Improvement Program grant. This number here at the top, $3,156,000 is an estimate based on what we anticipate carrying forward. And behind tab 4, you can see our adjusted end of year budget, our report for this fiscal year where we expect we're going to close out, and we're only a couple weeks from the end of the fiscal year. So we're hoping this is fairly accurate. So on the next page in your meeting notebook is this exact thing that we're talking about is our FY25 budget. So we estimate that between the carry forward and what we anticipate getting for our award for next year, we would have just over $3 million. And our operating expenses here are listed at 1.466, and that's all the things that are needed to staff the Children's Commission, to pay our salaries, fringe, and our supplies, and all, for us to get continuing education. That's our operational budget. Print costs, travel costs, all of that rolls into operational. And the commission projects are the costs associated with the projects we've talked about today. So for example, a pre-litigation guide has design need, it might have a print need, or hosting it on an online service that all has an associated cost to it. So these are the costs that we anticipate from these 3 standing committees, and we don't anticipate an additional cost from the data committee. It'll just be consumed with our operational costs. So building on this, all the numbers are the same. We just add a budget line category. Here we have the grants, and there are 4 grants that we're suggesting for approval this year. They are all continued funding that we have done in the past. None of these are new grant requests. So the first is to fund the DFPS regional attorney training, and Kelly Price is here. She's a great champion in this area and kind of the mastermind behind bringing it all together. And it's my understanding that this is pretty much the one and only place that per year that the regional attorneys can get together in person to have that networking and support for one another and to receive tailored content. And we know that you do a tremendous amount of work in our state and carry a lot of the caseload for CPS cases throughout the state. And we suggest that the commission approves this grant request this year. Next is 2 grant requests from OCA. One is to continue funding and support for CPCMS maintenance and the work to have the advisory council that informs all the updates that are made, as well as visiting judges that sit, generally they're retired judges with CPS experience who come in and sit for our child protection courts. And it's not otherwise budgeted for, so it's a really important need that when our child protection courts are unavailable, that we have experienced and knowledgeable judges who can hear those cases. And so we recommend that one as well. The next is the Texas Center for the Judiciary, a very long time and trusted partner of ours that we work with very closely all year long to pull off our annual Child Welfare Judges Conference in October, which is upon us. So this grant includes planning for the coming year as well as executing on the past year's grant request. And last but certainly not least is an integral function for our state, the Family Helpline that's operated by TLSC. If you are not aware, it's a tremendous resource for our state. It really stands in the gap and provides legal information to parents, caregivers, family members, members of the community when they have questions about the child welfare system. So we recommend all these as part of our budget. And we have scholarships. You heard about this new scholarship fund, which we're going to start with $5,000. It's not too much money, but we want to see how it goes and see what the requests are. And the appellate law section is something that we tried this past fiscal year, FY24, and it gives CPS lawyers an opportunity to get some training on filing for an appellate case, and they may not have done that before. They've only had trial experience. And so we just want to encourage more people into that practice area. And hopefully these scholarships can give them the training and education that they need to be able to do that. And the rest are, longstanding partnerships for external events and conferences that I've said before without this funding, a lot of people are not able to attend and get the CLE. So we think the scholarships are really key. And this last one sums it all up with the total proposed expenditures for $2,228,326. And I'll ask Patrick if I missed anything.
They did a great job.
Okay. I think this is a great time to see if anybody has any questions about either the strategies or the proposed budget.
On your, sorry, my apologies. It was regarding, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut off. I have one question about the podcast. And I'm wondering if you ever considered podcasts with youth alumni, a former foster youth. I'm just thinking about, if it's planned well and, sort of organized well, it could be really informative for youth who are, transitioning out, and for the caregivers and other organizations that support them. Kind of take the guessing out of that process.
Thank you. That's a great idea. I appreciate that. I'm working with some lived experience speakers to get ready for the October conference. I learned something from them in every conversation. And I think it's so critical to hear their experience with judges and lawyers.
There's a lot of conversation, not just in Texas, but across the country and beyond, about the whole idea of transitioning youth. I was on a panel with a group from Canada, Trinidad, and Jamaica, having that conversation. Yeah. Some challenges we have here.
The program that you suggested at the outset, the one concerning filing the removals without the termination component to it, is there going to be a name to that? And what, do you have more information on?
If you'd like more information, I would love to talk to you more about it. Right now, we're just calling it the TPR pilot, kind of casually.
I had a question on along the same lines. Well, first of all, Sheila, that's a great ad and a great idea. Along the same lines, I was going to ask, in this review process, does the federal government, I mean, they ask you for data, but do they offer you data? Is that an opportunity for you to get data for us to think about in terms of whether there are data that say that bringing the suit for removal and not termination at the outset has what outcome does that have in the end, if any? Are there data like that, and can we get it?
I have had early conversations with DFPS about a strong data and evaluation component to the pilot. We definitely want to be watching closely, and they have a lot of data that we can work with.
What would that pleading be?
So again, I think we need to find the jurisdictions that are willing to pilot it and maybe explore it with them. So I don't have a particular vision in mind, but I think we would just start with a petition for removal, and then later down the line, it maybe doesn't need to be a different style or cause number. I've heard another jurisdiction does it by motion. So we can explore what it looks like.
The idea is to have a phase of the case where you're not seeking termination.
Right.
You don't go all the way to, DEFCON 1 at the outset.
It is just such a different way
It
of
is,
looking at
yeah,
that.
right,
I'm like,
right.
whoa,
But
okay.
yeah,
what are
we're
we gonna
both
call
going.
this?
And that's why we're doing it as a pilot.
Yeah.
Because we don't know
Right,
what the impact will be
right.
unless
yeah.
we study it.
I'm not against it at all. I'm just like, wow.
I didn't know that the way that we do it here is maybe out of the norm
Yeah.
in the country.
Which is in,
Martinez Jones actually does have programs.
oh, does she?
Does, and she's shared with me motions, the way that they're filing them there, so that she uses that in her drug source. So she's able to work with those participants in a drug court without having to deal with the deadline, the dismissal deadline.
It just seems like it would have to be more than a motion, because you
Yeah,
have to
it
have a
was-
suit.
It was a sort of like a motion to participate, petition to participate. And then from there, it doesn't trigger the dismissal deadlines. She's able to work with certain parts, and then she's able to not have to deal with the dismissal deadline. So I thought it was a very And then there's the language in there discussing, this doesn't have the termination. So you may want to reach out.
I will. Thank you, Judge Morales. Great advice.
So based on what you were just saying, Judge, so potentially it could, that approach could create a little bit longer timelines? That would be amazing.
And she's used it along with her.
I mean, I think that would be amazing. I mean,
Well, and it's
to me, just from a appellate nerd point of view, just having a record where the evidence is developed for longer, more robust way for getting determination be.
It seems to work for her, so you may want to reach out to her.
Certainly will.
Well, and you might just get a different response from the parents potentially.
Sure. I mean, there's obviously going to be downsides for sure, but I do think that's an interesting approach.
Well, you may get a better response.
True, both, yeah.
So good thinking out of the box, or maybe not out of the box, just out of our box.
Yeah.
Are y'all suggesting that if there's a removal without a claim for termination, that the 12-month window is not engaged?
I don't know how she does it, to be honest. I need to take a look again at her petition, but it's a sort of petition that does not trigger a deadline per se of, I don't know how she did it. I have to look back at it, but it was a way of having to not, she was worried about using her drug court and not being tied to the timeline because of the dismissal deadline, because I kept on telling her how I use my drug court. And I'm always, sometimes these issues that we're dealing with them with very high substance abuse disorders, we're dealing with with our dismissal deadline, and sometimes we don't have enough time. And even though we're trying to get there, it just doesn't get us there. So I was trying to figure out how she did it. She had this way. She said, well, I do it in this manner. I was a little scared to do it, but I thought she's making it happen and her drug court is very successful. So it's something to look into.
And that makes sense, certainly within the context of drug courts, because they're so different. And you really are, the judiciary is kind of offering, hand-holding type services that can be very needed and very positive. So
I think she's trying to make her specialty court work in a manner that actually works. So I mean, it's worked for her. I wasn't I was a little scared because I'm just that way, but I'm sure if it's working for her, I'm sure it's something that you all could take a look at and see how that works. And if she's been able to review her findings, I think that would be excellent.
Since this is probably going to happen in the next year, that will certainly exist within the statutory scheme if there are legislative changes that are needed, but we'll make sure to craft the pilot around all the existing law.
The other thing I was going to add was that we had an executive committee meeting focused on the grants that are in the budget, bringing us back to the budget, which I'm going to ask the group to vote on momentarily. We had an executive committee meeting and thoroughly vetted these grant requests, thoroughly vetted other grant requests that came in and did not make the list, just as a matter of allocating resources. And with that, Jamie, if you're ready, I was going to ask are there any questions or further discussion with respect to the budget itself? So thank you for presenting all of those projects and the way that you tend to expend resources to advance each of them. Is there any further discussion before I ask someone, is there any motion to approve this budget? Second? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, so the proposed motion, the motion to approve the budget is none opposed. And with that, Amy, we're going to move one touch out of order, Dylan, to move on to a special presentation on data trends. Justice Lehrman, ask you to introduce her.
Yes. So we are just so fortunate to have two people here from DFPS to talk about us talk about this work. Of course, data is critical. And of course, we need to analyze this and be able to track what we're doing. And so the department recently released a new report that provides us lots and lots of information that we need to explore, because of course we need to have a basis for what we are doing, you know, and we need to have some tracking of what's going on. So I want to first of all thank you all for doing this and for taking the initiative to go through this very diligent and tedious process. And thank you for being here today to share it with us. So we have Sierra Fisher, who is the Director of Analytics for Change and Enhancement. Thank you for being here. And then we have the Deputy Commissioner of Operations, Jennifer Sims, who just spoke to us earlier to give us a presentation on this. So I want to turn it over to you, and thank you very much again for your time and your effort in this regard.
We are happy to be here. This is exciting. I've been around the department a long time, and one thing that is very true about us is we have a lot of data. And, you know, we have done an annual data book for 1 million years. I don't really know if it's a million, but at least 30, I think, years. And that's good. And that's helpful. And that's certainly a go-to place to get data, but it's an annual data. And the world has evolved to a place where we can do more frequent and better updates on that information. And so we started looking at what's the most meaningful data that people really need and would want to use. What we're going to share with you today is by no means we consider finished or perfect. We put this together and we've been doing this now, about 3 quarters that we've been doing it. And every time we've tweaked it a little bit. So as you look at it, if you go, boy, that is a really confusing chart, or that doesn't, feel free to give us feedback, because we really we're trying to make this meaningful and useful to people. So Sierra and her team have done an amazing job putting this together. But as we know, it's the reader that needs to really be able to understand it. And we will continue to evolve this. It gets posted on our website on a quarterly basis. We're making it available. We're sharing it with the legislature. We're really trying to make this the go-to place so that people have the data that they need at their fingertips. There's other things that we probably are going to add to this over time. So if you also see things that you feel like are missing, please don't hesitate to point those out as well. Like, oh, that's the one thing I wish you had, and that's not in here. We'd want to know that from y'all as well. So with that, I'll turn it over to Sierra, and she's going to share the data.
Thank you very much for having me. So I'm just going to give you kind of a high level overview of what this document looks like. Probably not going to have time to get into the weeds of every single data element, but you're welcome to visit this on our website. Okay, it's going to be a little small up there, but so we start with statewide intake and we flow through our system with data representing each different stage of service. And so we have graphics to represent the different key indicators that we look at in these different program areas. And the little blue boxes have some takeaways that give you a key into what you might be wanting to look at or focus on as for each graphic. So can you all see it back there? It might be kind of small. I don't know how to zoom in over here, but I'll start with statewide intake and just kind of give you the high levels. So for statewide intake, we saw, thank you. So we saw a 7%. So, okay, one more thing. This is quarter 3. So we're looking at quarter 3. We will have the quarter 4 data probably in about October. We just had that data wrap up because August just was finished. So when we were looking at quarter 3, we saw about 7% less calls in quarter 3 compared to last fiscal year around the same time. But our abandoned calls were down by 23%. You're going to see also the next bars there. We saw our hold time go down slightly and due to this decrease in calls. And then our number of e-reports was down 6%, so similar to our number of calls down. And so moving on to how this sort of inflows into our investigations, which is the next page. That decrease in calls led to, oh, sorry, do you need me to flip it? There we go. That decrease in calls flows into our investigations and alternative response. So I have a box there that describes the difference between alternative response and investigations. And we're seeing in that fiscal year quarter three, we are seeing 28,000 less calls than the same time investigations and AR stages than the last time last year around the same time. So that's about 13% less, or give or take. And so this year we're going to see fewer stages of investigations and AR opened and closed than last fiscal year. We've seen a remarkable decrease in our average daily caseloads for investigations. So this is both contributed to our decrease in turnover in investigations, as well as that slight decrease in the number of investigations in AR. So that's contributing to that caseloads. And we have another little box to reference with how we measure caseloads. If you are interested, that's based on the SAO measurement. So going into the next section, that decrease in caseloads has contributed to an increase in some of the metrics we look at for face-to-face contact. So we have our priority 1 and priority 2. We have different timelines for making that face-to-face contact with children. And so we've seen an increase in both the actual or attempted, right? You can't always make contact with children, but we attempt it. And then we have when we actually make contact, which is the solid line below that. And then finally on this page, we have our parental child safety placements. In quarter 3 of fiscal year 24, we had 707 open and 639 closed. Overall, there were 1,054 during the PCSPs during the quarter, and that has been significantly decreased since that fiscal year 21 timeframe. So, at the end of an investigation, in consultation with the courts, of course, we're making that determination of whether we go to FBSS, removal, or close the case. And so we've seen an increase in FBSS in that quarter 3. And then we've seen quarter 3 saw similar trends in removals across the fiscal year and slightly lower than previous fiscal years, which isn't shown here. Despite that decrease in removals, which we'll see in a later data element, the types of removals have remained pretty similar. So neglectful supervision still is our top removal reason. Families can have multiple removal reasons, or children can have multiple removal reasons. And then we've seen over the fiscal years a slight increase in physical abuse and physical neglect. These are likely due to legislative changes. And then finally, the last metric we have here looking at investigation stages is recidivism. So we look at when the investigation was closed and did not open for FBSS or removal, what happened within the year that the subsequent year. We look at if there was an RTB, if there was a new FBSS stage or a new removal. And we have seen a slight uptick in this, but I think that drop really had to do that we saw in fiscal year 22 had to do with our drop in removals in FBSS. So that way the outcomes were less common outcomes. And so we're just sort of our assumption is that we're sort of rebounding back to normal levels now that we're stabilizing in the number of removals and FBSS stages as outcomes. Maybe I'll pause there and any questions on investigations? Yes.
So I'm in a region where we have the Texas Family First pilot project. So how does the TFF numbers impact or not impact the data that you're presenting? Because a large portion of my cases are now on the TFF pilot. So to me, that would skew my result data. So I was just interested if they were incorporated in here or separated out.
They're not separated out here. Those still would be considered FBSS stages, despite being more court-ordered FBSS stages. So they'd be counted in our, stages open to FBSS and the darker, blue bars at the top. But they're not separated out here, but maybe we could create a section
Yeah,
about
that's something we can
CFS.
certainly talk about that. And I think because we only have the pilots in a few places, you'd see that more at the regional level as well, even if we separate it out. But that's something we can certainly take a look at. That's a good suggestion.
And then I'll just make a note. I don't have to go into the details here, but we do have some residential childcare investigations data as well as our, so it kind of reflects the same structure as our investigations data, including timelines, meeting timelines and caseloads, looking at number of stages opened and closed. And we also look into our daycare investigations, number of stages open, close, caseloads, and timelines. So the next stage of service this report focuses on is family-based safety services. So this represents all family-based safety services, both court-ordered and not. So this has the number of opened and the number of closed. Q3, we saw a 15% increase in the number of stages open and 45% in stages closed. Looking out, I have the fiscal year 24 total numbers, and I think we are going to see definitely a higher number this at the end of this fiscal year. More similar numbers to fiscal year 21, I would say. So we're looking at about 16,000 stages open. The increase in the stages open has contributed to an increase in the average daily caseloads for FBSS staff. You saw that number kind of tick up, but I think it's important to look at the year over year trends, and we can see that 9.9 average daily caseload looks pretty similar to when we had more FBSS stages in the past. So in the fiscal year 2021 timeframe. And then we also have recidivism here for closed FBSS stages that did not result in removal. Same outcomes, RTB, FBSS, and removal as the outcome, looking at if that happened within a year. And again, we have a slight increase in that recidivism, likely due to the same things I spoke about in investigations. But something to note that's kind of unique about this is that since we had that decrease in FBSS in fiscal year 22, this outcomes for fiscal year 24 are likely those cases. We're looking kind of a year out from that. And likely the fewer cases that we had in FBSS tended to be, higher risk, more severe FBSS stages. And so because that denominator is a little bit smaller and because those families have more high needs, we may be seeing higher recidivism in fiscal year 24, the fiscal year 24 timeframe. So we're going to be continuing to track this and make sure that this number stabilizes, but that is something that we're keeping an eye on. And then we move to conservatorship. So this is looking at children new to substitute care. In fiscal year 22 and fiscal year 23, we saw a big drop due to legislative changes. Fiscal year 24, the number now is going to be, I just looked at it this morning, it's 9,199. So we are a little bit lower than fiscal year 23 at the end of fiscal year 24. But still sort of keeping that path of similar to fiscal year 22 and 23. So our metrics here for conservatorship, looking at average daily caseload, they're only focused on our legacy staff, just due to the way we have to calculate this measure. But when we looked at fiscal year 24, report 3, our average daily caseload for our conservatorship staff was 15.4. And this has been declining. And then we have a metric to look at our monthly face-to-face contact with children in the substitute care or adoption stages. And typically this number is quite high and like, 98 or above. We saw a little drop in Q3 of fiscal year 24. And I think what we looked into this, and I think the two kind of drivers of this are, we moved to one of our, a couple CBC. We moved to CBC in a couple of the regions, which contributed to this. And I think there was sort of a combination of that transition, both in the data entry. So there were some shifts in where the data needed to be entered and where it needs to be entered timely to document that the face-to-face contacts were occurring, as well as just transitioning with staff and trying to get new staff trained up to make those contacts. And then the last metric here is looking at our children and kinship placements. And so this is a focus that our agency is working on right now. We saw fiscal year 24, Q3, 39.9% of our children were in kinship placements.
Kinship is an area that we're really concentrating a lot of our efforts on right now. How do we support and think through what do those families need to succeed? And it sort of ties into the conversation we had earlier around children with mental health needs or other high acuity needs. One of the, not that all of these kids have those challenges, but when a kinship family takes a child in, the high acuity kids have really shown us we need to think about whatever the placement, whether it's kinship or wherever they are, what do we need to wrap around those families in a way? And so I think the experience with the high acuity kids has helped us to think about what do we need to be doing to better support kinship families? What do we need? What services do we need to wrap around them? How do we need to help them get connected to the things that can help them to be a successful placement for a child and frankly feel comfortable taking a child? Sometimes it's a big ask. I get a call in the middle of the night. Hey, I have 3 kids. Would you like to have them today? That's a pretty daunting thing. And so thinking about what do we talk about and how do we offer those services from the get-go, help them connect to those. I think we're learning lessons from that we're incorporating. And so we're hopeful these numbers will rebound back up a little bit more.
Why do you think those numbers have gone down?
I do think that some of it is as we have fewer kids coming into the system, they tend to be kids that do have higher needs. And so when a family gets that first call, they're a little daunted. I will say one thing that we've seen that's impressive is in investigations, and it's not really reflected here, but we've been looking at kinship as first placement, how we can do that. And actually we're improving on kinship as first placement. The challenge often is, can they sustain? What do they need to sustain that placement? A lot of times people are like, sure, we'll have them, but how do we help them sustain? And where we're seeing the drop off is actually as time goes by. So that's an area that we realize we need to figure out. And some of that may be the services I was talking about earlier that we need to work with the Health and Human Services Commission and others. So what are we doing to bring services to bear to help this family to be successful? I also think that the Texas Child Center Care will help. There's additional, because we tie what we pay kinship caregivers to our rates, what kinship caregivers receive will also increase as support. And I think sometimes it's just challenging. You can do it initially, but then as time goes on, it's expensive. I have a 13-year-old and she costs a lot of money every day. And so helping those families to be able to sustain that, I think is something that we really need to, it's both financial and it's also support that we need to bring to bear.
Be able to ask if he's going. You provide TBRI training for the kinship placements. I'm wondering.
It's available, but it's not mandatory. Unless they become licensed. But for non-verified, no, we don't really have any mandated trainings. We make things available.
Would be so helpful.
It really
Especially where you put I need children in that home that they're not used to, and so they don't know. It's not the same.
Yes.
Parenting that you would.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's some of what Luann's been thinking about, like what services do we wrap around those to all families, but particularly families in that situation.
Have you all been thinking about any way to track whether the heightened statutory requirements for removal at the front end, what kind of a Has that been a positive outcome or a negative outcome? And have y'all thought about that? And
Well, I'll just say I think about it. I think, I was really skeptical. I worked for the department off and on throughout my career. And when I saw the launch, I was pretty nervous, but the numbers haven't borne out yet. And maybe they will, or maybe they won't, but we're not seeing bad outcomes. We're not seeing those things that would
how are you
be
gauging
red
that?
flags. The data that the recidivism, the child fatalities, those kinds of things that you typically look at in the system, we haven't seen big swings up in any of those areas. It's certainly something that we need to keep an eye on, but I was skeptical and I've been really pleasantly surprised. I think that, it's good. But at the same time, there are still families who are in need that may not need to be interacting with the child welfare system, but may need services and supports. And so the Health and Human Services Commission is standing up a family support division that's really organized around helping families to be more self-sufficient and have the services and supports that they need. That as that strengthens up, I'm hoping that we may do an investigation and think we don't need to remove these children, but we want to be able to get them and connect them with things that can help them to be a healthier family. And so that's something that we're working with our partners at HHSC on.
Question. I'm just curious, the data that you shared, do you all have that data by race, ethnicity?
We do have a lot of it yes. Yeah. I mean, as you know so well, some stuff we do have and some things we don't, but yes, a lot.
Yeah. And I'm just curious about how families of color are faring based on the data you've shared. Are you seeing the same kind of positive impact for families of color that you're seeing for white families?
Have you looked at it that way?
I think we looked at particularly the drop in removals, but I know that we have a rider coming out. My team's working on it this week, a disproportionality rider that will be coming out in the next month.
Okay.
So I think maybe we'll have a
We'll
better
know soon.
sense.
Yeah, okay. One more question. I'm curious to know, do you all, I think it's really, my work in Texas started with kinship care, so it's kind of a real place, special place for me. And I'm really glad to know that you all are focusing on that. I think there's so much opportunity there and so much support that families need, but I'm curious to know, do you have some sort of plan or mechanism in place to hear from families about what they feel they need?
Yes.
Yeah.
We have been engaging with families
Yeah.
quite a bit to try to gain input and insight. It's always, I don't know the right word for it, but causes me pause when I hear from them because you just see it from a very different place. And so, yes, we definitely both youth and families, we're really trying to listen and hear them out.
And then the last question is, you mentioned training. I think someone asked about, if families were receiving the training for that families who are being certified would receive. Is there an opportunity to provide maybe truncated version for families that are not seeking certification, but could still benefit from the
We
knowledge?
make it available. It's just optional, and whether they,
Yeah. Yeah.
it's really an optional thing.
Yeah.
Because they're not licensed, we're not adding an additional requirements to them. Now, there's a big movement that I should talk about a little bit to change the requirements to become a verified foster parent in the state. And I'm really hopeful for that because, I was a foster parent at one time and it was a lot. There's a lot of requirements that are on you. And if you're a kinship family who's taken the call at night and you've brought these children into your home to make that transition to stepping up and to meeting all of the standards, it's pretty daunting. And sometimes maybe a little bit unfair to kinship families. There's square feet requirements and there's all sorts of things that, and so there's a movement nationally, but particularly here in Texas, we're working with the Health and Human Services Commission to refine the kinship standards to define them in a more appropriate for kinship kind of a way. So it's different than being a foster parent who's taking in a child that you don't know and that you don't have a relationship. There's a higher expectation there. We want good things for kinship families and we want them to do well by the child, but there's a relationship that's already there and we don't really want those standards to become a barrier to that. So we're working closely with the Health and Human Services to refine those standards. That would be really helpful because then those parents those kinship families can receive the foster care payment and they would receive even more additional compensation to help them to be able to make the transition to having 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 kids more into their home. That's a lot to ask of a family. So we have a lot more. You tell us when you want us to stop.
Well, how important is it?
Faster. If you'd like, we can just tell you a little bit about what else is in here so that you're just aware of the.
Okay, just know, as Justice Huddle mentioned, we have 15 minutes to lunch, so.
Okay, well, we won't get between you and lunch. We'll tell you what's in here.
Yeah, we can just give an overview. So there's a slide about our children without placement and our trends, which Brock spoke to some of our efforts and trends that have been contributing to this. We have exits from conservatorship, what that looks like from the type of exit and then the time to exit from conservatorship.
And I know you guys are particularly interested for time to exit. And that's definitely a measure that's in here. And I think, you know, we were talking earlier about the pilot that y'all are talking about. I think there's like the feds want it both ways. They want you to reconsider whether you seek termination. We seek termination from the beginning, but they also want the case closed in 12 months. So they want both. And so finding a way to balance that out is a challenge. So.
And then we do have our contract CBC performance measures, which are contract measures. And so we go into each of these broken out by the different SSCCs. It looks at trends over time, so you can identify the trends over time compared to their baseline measures, so their historical measures. You can take a look at those, and we have some new measures as well. One looking at time to permanency and time to reunification. So I'll just mention that if you're interested in, this is taking a look at a little different than the exits from conservatorship, but those children that enter in a particular year of removal, how long it takes them to exit and what percentage exit in 1 year, 18 months, 2 years, and 3 years. So this is a new measure and something we're exploring.
Yeah, so if you look at this and you think, I think this is really helpful, but it'd be better if it looked this way or that way, because we're trying something new here. So we're open to feedback on this one.
Absolutely. Adult protective services. And then we have a final page on our workforce, which is taking a look at our turnover for our caseworkers and then broken out by the different levels of caseworkers. So 1, 2, 3, 4, and looking at those trends over time as well. So that is the entire report, which is pretty hefty. Any questions, feedback? Yeah.
I did have one question on the permanency outcomes.
Sure.
One of them that was listed was emancipation. I wanted to clarify because I think that sometimes has a different legal term of art where a child is emancipated from the disabilities of a minority, say a 17-year-old is legally granted adulthood. Is that what you're referring to there, or is that children who are exiting the system when they turn 18 and become adults that way?
Yeah, I think usually we're talking about aging out.
Maybe we need to change our term.
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify that.
Tiara, thank you. I know that y'all have gone through kind of data whiplash over the decades. First, you weren't transparent. You didn't put enough out there. So, you know, a decade or so ago, you put everything out there. Then the criticism became, it's too complicated. So I think like the 3 bears analogy, you got it right. I really think this is the midpoint that makes a lot of sense. So thank you.
Anything else? Well, if you read this over and later, because when you may look at it and see it bigger and have other feelings about it. So don't hesitate to reach out and let us know if you have other thoughts or ideas about this. We welcome them.
Do you, before we break, I have one question.
from the, maybe the very first slide you showed is, do you have a sense of why calls have declined as much as they have?
Why what?
Calls.
Oh, calls.
There have been some changes. There were some statutory changes last session, and we've been working to try to educate people, the difference between anonymous and confidential is very confusing to people. I don't really know why, but it is. Because we no longer take anonymous calls. People have to identify who they are. The information that they give us is still confidential. That may have changed people's pattern of how they're reporting. There's some things like that. So we're keeping an eye on to see if that's it. It's not unusual for the summer months to be low, but the summer months were higher last year than they are this year. So we're gonna keep it. That's one of the things we really need to keep an eye on over time. But we've also been really doing a lot of education around who should report, how they should report. There's, the mandatory reporters. And sometimes we were getting, for example, if something happened at a school or school found out about something, 5 people would call from the school. Well, we've really been trying to work on, we don't need 5 people to call you. Thank you. 1 of you will be fine. So there's some of those kind of refinements as well that we've been working on trying to educate people better. And so that also may be contributing to some of the changes.
That's interesting about the anonymous part of it, because I would think that's something you really need to track, because if that is going to have a chilling effect on people, whether it should or shouldn't, doesn't really matter. We would want to know that.
Do you track professional versus non-professional callers? And so do you know where the
Mandated versus,
right,
yeah.
mandated? Do you know where that decrease has come, on which side?
We can look. I don't know. I would tell you, Stephen Black, the head of statewide intake, I guarantee you look at it. I can't say that I know off the top of my head. Stephen is very good at tracking the data on his utilization. So. Thank you all very much. We appreciate the chance to share this, and every quarter it'll be out there waiting for you to read it. I know you'll be waiting with bated breath.
Well, thank you very much. We really appreciate it. So we're going to jump back to the legislation and policy resource presentation. Dylan, I hope we're not catching you off guard here. And as you all know, we created a new commission to focus on legislative and policy matters a while ago. We serve as a resource to all 3 branches of government. And so this committee provides an opportunity to gather input from judges to help inform the legislative process. And so I'm going to turn it over to Dylan to bring us up to date on this and to give us some of their initial recommendations. Thank you, Dylan.
Ms. Lerman. So do we have a PowerPoint? Ready to go? So what I wanted to do today is to update everybody on the work that the Legislation and Policy Resource Committee has been doing over the summer. What they have been doing is trying to draft legislative recommendations for the Texas Judicial Council. And what the committee has tried to focus on is solving technical problems that exist within the family code and trying to make sure that it's operational, that it makes sense, and that it's consistent. And so they had discussions on which recommendations they thought were most important. We prioritized those recommendations, and then we drafted legislation wording in response to those issues that were identified. And I don't want to go over the specific wording today, but I did want to inform everyone on the specific issues that we identified and the specific recommendations that we are going to make. Those recommendations have already been presented to the Texas Judicial Council Civil Justice Committee. We presented them on Monday. They were very well received, and then we will plan on presenting them to the full Texas Judicial Council on September 27th. So we can go to the next slide. So the first recommendation is regarding the new reasonable efforts prong that was added in the last legislative session. So as you all are familiar with, this was something that was added last session to create a requirement that in addition to proving best interests and a ground for termination, that the jury also had to find, judge or jury had to find that the department made reasonable efforts to reunify the family in order to terminate a parent's rights. But there was also language that required the describing of those reasonable efforts specifically in writing in a separate section of the order. And that was placed in two different sections of the code. It was placed in subsection F, which covered the findings that needed to be made, and it was also added to subsection G, which specified the requirements that needed to be in the court order. And that created a lot of ambiguity and confusion about whether or not that specific list of reasonable efforts was a question for the jury in a trial of fact, whether or not they needed to agree on all those specific reasonable efforts, or whether that was something that the duty of the judge to list out in the court order, but it was not something that the jury was supposed to decide. So to clarify that, we're proposing striking the language of specificity from subsection F, which is the findings, and leaving it in subsection G, which requires the things that need to be in the court order. So that's the proposal to resolve that ambiguity about that particular provision that was created last session. So our next recommendation was adding authorization to conduct hearings remotely to child protection court judges. So this ability to conduct hearings remotely was given to the statutory child support courts last session, but it wasn't added to the authorization for the child protection court. And what we're proposing is legislation that mirrors that language that was added to the child support courts be added for child protection courts. And what that would specifically do is it would allow a judge to authorize a hearing to be conducted remotely. It would allow a judge to authorize a person to participate or require a person to participate remotely. And it would also give a respondent the right to have a final hearing on the merits in person, but that right can be waived. So that can be done virtually, but if the respondent wants it to be done in person, they have that right to have it be conducted in person.
Can I ask you a question?
Sure.
Is it going to specifically exempt those hearings from the CPRC requirement that a remote witness has to have been deposed?
I don't know. I'll have to go back and look at that. But if you could email me that and make sure that I have that covered, I would love that. So thank you. Moving on to recommendation 3. This is clarification regarding the ground M. So ground M under 161.001 allows a parent's rights to be terminated, not based on what they've done in the current case, but based on their past conduct. If they had a previous termination of a child, their rights can be terminated for the current case under this ground M. And in the second session, ground M was limited in its application. So there was a requirement added that you could only terminate under ground M if the D&E finding, the endangerment finding, had occurred within 12 months of the department getting managing conservatorship. But it didn't specify whether or not it was permanent managing conservatorship or temporary managing conservatorship. And so this proposal just clarifies that the triggering date is the date the department gets permanent managing conservatorship, because that makes sense. When a D&E ground occurs, it occurs at the end of the case when a final order happens, and then you would have 1 year after that happens to file a case based on the M ground. So that just clarifies that when we talk about the triggering date for that limitation on ground M, we're talking about the date the department gets permanent managing conservatorship rather than temporary. Moving on to recommendation 4. This is regarding the court-ordered services statute that was overhauled by House Bill 567 in the 87th legislative session. And one of the things that that legislation did is it provided a lot of structure and due process to the court-ordered service statute, including dismissal dates and extensions very similar to the dismissal dates and extensions that we see in the 262 TMC side of the cases. But there was a difference in that those dismissal dates, the wording in the court-ordered services statute is that they are triggered by the date the order is signed rather than the date the order is rendered. And the date the order is rendered is the language that is used in 263 and the other deadline statutes in TMC cases. So our proposal is just to change that language in the court-ordered services date. So the triggering date for those deadlines is the date the order is rendered rather than the date the order is signed. That will also have the advantage of not delaying those dates artificially. If the order takes a while to get signed, that they will start as soon as the judge actually makes that order. Moving on to recommendation 5. This is just sort of a basic cleanup. So again, House Bill 567 changed the standard by which a court had to determine whether or not a child should go home at a permanency hearing. So it created a new standard by which the court had to make the decision about whether or not a child should go home. That was placed in 263-002, which applies to any hearing that reviews the child's placement. But there was also the standard that was placed in 263-306, which governed specifically for the permanency hearings. And that statute also had a standard for when a child should be returned home at a permanency hearing. But when 263-002 was changed, 263-306 was not. So there were two different standards. And even though the statutory construction says 263-002 controls because it's later in time, this is just cleaning that up so there's not two conflicting standards out there. And the proposal is simply for 263-306 to reference the standard in 263-002, that decision has to be made with that standard that was passed in the 87th legislative session. Moving on to recommendation number 6. This is again a clarification regarding the reinstatement of parental rights statute that was passed by House Bill 2926 in the 87th. And what that statute did is it created a new opportunity for parents whose rights had been previously terminated to apply for reinstatement. But the language that it used was that a parent's rights had to be involuntarily terminated. And the concern is that that language, involuntary, might discourage settlement of cases, particularly parents who might be considering negotiating a mediated settlement agreement or signing an affidavit of relinquishment. That if they sort of voluntarily choose to relinquish their parental rights, that the opportunity to apply for reinstatement might be foreclosed. That hasn't been how the statute's been functioning. DFPS has been, I think, very open in how they've interpreted that statute. But this is just to clarify, to make sure that it's abundantly clear that if a parent voluntarily relinquishes their parental rights, that doesn't foreclose the opportunity for them to apply for it later if they've turned their life around and if that situation is appropriate. It's simply striking the language involuntary from the reinstatement statute. Moving on to recommendation number 7. This is again regarding the court ordered services statute. So I talked a little bit earlier about how the court ordered services statute got that structure and due process. And part of that structure and due process, it allowed 2 extensions of time for a court ordered services case. It was supposed to end automatically within 6 months. But it could have 1 6-month extension and then 1 final 6-month extension. But the language that each of those extensions use limits it to a certain party requesting that extension. For the first extension, language specifically says that the department has to request that extension. For the second extension, it specifically says that a parent's attorney has to request that extension. So this proposal would simply just allow either extension to be requested by any party to the case. So it could be the department, it could be the parent's attorney, it could be the child's attorney, but any department could request either a first or a second extension of time on a court ordered services case. And then the last recommendation, recommendation 8, is regarding the requirement that a child be placed in the least restrictive setting, even if that placement is outside the catchment area, but still in the state of Texas. And the reason why this proposal was drafted is because many of the CBC regions have contracts that incentivize placement of the children within that region. But some judges noticed a pattern of sometimes children would be placed within the catchment area, but in a more restrictive setting, even though a less restrictive setting might be available outside the catchment area. So for example, a child might be placed in a residential treatment center in a catchment area, even though there was a foster home available for that child outside the catchment area. And so this is just clarifying that when it comes to placing a child in the least restrictive setting, that priority takes place over even a child within the catchment area. So when we talk about placing the children, we want them to be placed in the least restrictive setting possible, regardless of where that placement exists within the catchment area. So I think that is all of the recommendations that we had, and I'm happy to answer any questions anyone might have. Justice Countess?
First of all, congratulations, Dylan. We're going to miss you, but I know you'll be a great asset to them. I have a question about recommendation number 4. Which was the order date.
Yes, the changing from signed to rendered.
Right, so, well, from rendered, I see what you mean, but so if there's a question, if there's an appellate issue that deals with when the clock started ticking, right, which would potentially be jurisdictional how would we, if the date on the, if we're supposed to look at the date the order is rendered rather than the date the order is signed? So for us, what that's gonna look like, right, is going, I assume, coming back through the reporter's record. I mean, ideally, the briefing will be good and they'll point us to it, but we're gonna need to find that in the reporter's record where the judge orally rendered.
Yes, and just to be clear, that's all rendered is already the language in 262 and 263. So
Okay.
rendered is the language that
Okay.
exists in TMC cases that are more likely to give us when we talk about that
Okay.
deadline that cuts off jurisdiction. Rendered is the current language
Okay.
under those statutes. So this is just changing the court to services statute to match that existing language.
Okay, that's helpful. That makes, so we maybe we're sort of already doing that. It's just not something that I've seen that way before, but yeah. All right, I just was concerned for a
It can
minute.
be kind of confusing sometimes because sometimes a trial court will take something under advisement after the close of the.
Right, it's not always like,
Not always.
I'm rendering right now. They don't always it's not always that way on the record. That's why that's why in almost every other area of law, you're looking at the date it was signed, even if the parties are like, no, the judge told us that he was gonna grant this. It's like, okay, but fair enough, and I understand. I'm not disagreeing. I just wanted a little clarification. So, and then on recommendation number 7, about, so now both parties can move for an extension of time to complete court-ordered services. Again, these are more, I guess, thoughts, not questions, and maybe I'm sure y'all have already gone through all this, but just like, so then currently it's the department.
Yeah, so currently the language for the first extension says the court can grant an additional request of 6 months of time upon request of the department. And then the second extension says that it has a list of, I think, 5 things that have to be in place for that second extension to be granted. And the final one is it has to be requested by the parent or the parent's attorney. So there's actually more than just the parent's attorney requesting it. There's, I think, 5 other requirements. The exact requirements escape me at this moment.
Okay, no, that's good. That actually goes to what I was gonna ask. So so there's more than just,
Yes.
because I'm like imagining these, ineffective assistance of counsel cases, like we were never even asked for an extension and I got terminated for not, anyway, okay, that, if there's other requirements.
Nothing changes about those other requirements. It's just that it has to be requested by the parent or their attorney.
That's it.
Any other questions?
I'm going to opportunistically ask you one. A question has arisen on petitions to reinstate whether the person is entitled to a lawyer appointed in order to pursue that claim.
That's a good question. We didn't touch on that in our review of that statute. My initial reaction would be the way that I believe under 107 it's worded is that a parent has to be facing either termination of the parental rights or custody by the department to trigger the right to counsel under 107.
It just refers to 101 and 105 by number. I think it says an action under 101 and 105. We're interpreting that so far as you don't get a lawyer when you move to reinstate, but we don't really have a good answer. Do you have an opinion?
I don't, unfortunately. And it's not something that the legislative group discussed. So it's a good question, but I don't have an answer for you.
I told you it was opportunistic, but he's leaving, so it's not.
Right? Ask him to run off with the book.
Yeah, he's leaving. I got to ask him now.
I have a question. Why can't a parent ask one more time to finish their service plan?
Well, it's interesting. That's why it's kind of odd is the parent can, but only the second time.
I know, the first.
Yeah, it's.
They can't.
Yeah, that's
why we want
That's really unfair. Because they're talking about the drug issues.
Right.
The relapse issue. Yeah,
So
I think it's a great.
That's just how the original statute was drafted. So this just sort of opens it up so any party can request the extension. Because yes.
Even on the first time?
Yeah, even on the first time. So a parent could extend, the extension, attorney for the child could, the department could, anybody could request that first extension and anybody could request the second extension.
I didn't understand
No problem.
Just want to add one asterisk on number 8, which is that we've run these ideas by DFPS and have some feedback on this one, that there could be implications for the performance measures with the community-based care contracts, and we'll work with them on the language that comes out of this committee. And it's obviously a balance between wanting to keep kids close to home.
Right.
And wanting children in the least restrictive environment in a family-like setting. Those are both very important goals of the child welfare system. So just wanted to add that to Dylan's comments.
The education concerns flares when I see this, because we've been talking about the fact that we're starting to really see that the kids who are bounced from school to school, they never graduate. And so it turns into not only trying to help the parents, but we're desperately trying to get the kid to graduate. And the more moves there are, the less likely that is to happen. So when I see this, my number one priority is trying to keep the kid in the school district and normalize their life as much as possible with the same teachers and the same friends. And so I don't know if this conflicts. It kind of seems like it would. If they're looking at least restrictive outside rather than whatever they can do to keep them at home in their school district. So
That's of course required by state and federal law. They're entitled to remain in the school of origin. So, we need to revisit this, I think, and with that feedback, we'll definitely take it in-house and maybe even pull down this recommendation. So we'll look at it more. Thank you for sharing
Maybe
that.
soften.
Just first, and I can,
Sure.
I can give you another example, like some of us that are on some of the lines between regions. What we don't want to see is that a child is could have been placed 30 miles away in the next region over, but instead they go from Lockhart, Texas to several hundred miles away to a different place in that region. And so that's one of the things we were really trying to not incentivize and say, look, you can place them 30 miles away. That's the best place to be, even though it might hurt a CBC number or something, but that's normal for a child. Normal is not being 200 miles away from your family.
the rural areas, we have some communities that have graduating classes of 2 or 3 students. There's no foster home closer than El Paso. And so they take the child and they put them in El Paso and they go into a school with 1,500 or 2,000 kids. And you can imagine what happens. They've never even seen that many people in one place in their life. And now they're in a class with that number. And of course, we were saying within 30 days, they're in 3 schools anyway, because they're going to get moved at the adversarial or when somebody gets cleared for a family member in San Antonio. And now the pinball is on. And so we really in the rural areas desperately want to find a way not to let that happen. Thank you for what you said.
I'd like to make a comment about that. I'd like to second what you said. I've seen youth who were in March and they were going to graduate in high school in May after a stable period of a year. And then one brought up the least restrictive placement. And that's the child didn't, or the youth didn't get a voice. That's the last thing they wanted to happen was, hey, I'm graduating in May, don't move me. And again, they end up 200 miles away because it's a least restrictive placement. I think we have to be very, very careful about that language. And somehow it should be based on need as well as, meeting the federal requirement for least restricted placement, because that can be a very dangerous two-edged sword for kids, and really disrupt their care. And we need to be very careful about how that's used.
Would you identify yourself? I can't see your name tag.
I'm Mike Foster. I'm part of the Collaborative Council.
I know a couple of years ago, there was some discussion about the, having a hearing, pre-removal or the emergency petition being filed or at the time of the file. You remember that?
Are you talking about the ex parte language?
Yeah.
Yes.
Did anything ever come of that?
No, I think after the Office of Court Administration, released their guidance regarding that practice, we didn't get any judicial request to make any changes regarding that statute. So it was something that was discussed, but the committee didn't settle on that as a priority for a legislative change this session. Are there any other questions? Well, now I have to very quickly take the time to add to Jamie's embarrassment by complimenting her so much on everything that she's done for me as an employee of the Children's Commission. I'm so sad to be leaving. This has been the best place I've ever worked and best team I've ever worked with. And it's exciting to have the opportunity to lead an organization, and Jamie will be my model for how I will lead that. And I just want to thank her for the opportunity for everything that I've done, and thank everybody here for all the work that you've done and the opportunity to work with everyone, because that's been the best part of this job is all the people that I've got to work with and meet so many people from across the entire state. So I just want to thank everyone here for all the work they've done.
And with that, let's have Justice Huddle introduce our new wonderful employee at the Office of Court Administration.
So Jeff Sunakawa is not Megan Lavoy. Jeff is how new to OCA?
So I'm not new. I've actually been at OCA for 6 years.
New position.
My colleague Mark is new.
No, I'm not new.
Well, you've been with OCA for 8.5 years. You want to start all over? Yes.
Rewind.
Let me just say that I'm glad you're here. I know OCA has a lot going on today. So thank you, grateful for your time and welcome. And I understand you want to provide an update. You have the floor.
Thank you. So Marcus Crosby began in this current position as the Children's Court Program Manager 3 months ago. July. He took the position previously held by Anissa Johnson. Was a frequent attender of these meetings. Marcus hails from Judge Minkowski's court up in McLennan County, so he's been around our courts for 9 or so years doing that. Is on the home stretch to completing his law degree as well. So thrilled to have him on board. We feel like we're going to have a lot of great changes in our program. Megan sends her regrets. She is juggling multiple meetings even on a Friday. So she and I talked, and there's just a few updates we wanted to give that we thought this group might want to know about. We have just completed our LAR appropriation requests with the state. Some of the highlights that we wanted to mention, we requested funding for, we've nicknamed them docket rangers, but they're more or less data coordinators that we're hoping we can deploy to the regions around the state to help with the reporting practices for clerk's offices. With some of the new case level data reporting requirements, we've noticed that our clerk's offices are really having a lot of issues on the reporting practices. So we're trying to find some funding to help there. We've requested a raise for our court coordinators for our children's courts. That has been long overdue. And it's been a sort of an equity issue in maintaining our court coordinators in our courts. TIDC has requested funding for expansion of public defense offices, as well as funding for the Family Protection Representation Program, which was established last session, but there was no funding attached to that. We're also looking for funding for a statewide specialty court case management system. OCA has oversight over specialty courts in the state, your drug courts, mental health courts, veterans treatment courts. And we have found that many of these courts just do not have any type of case management system and aren't collecting the data necessary for running the specialty courts. So we're asking for funding to help counties out to maintain those dockets in the specialty courts. Talking about case level data, that's been one of our large focuses in the last few years. Case level data is probably the biggest project OCA has ever done in its existence. If you don't know, currently we collect data from courts at an aggregate county level, which means we have information about courts for Travis County and for Harris County, but we don't collect case court specific information. So last session, there were a number of bills passed on case level data, which are now rolling into being into effect. Two big ones that are causing a lot of anxiety for judges in our courts. House Bill 1182 This is specifically for counties that are over a population of 1 million. We used to call this the Big Six, which is now turned to the Big Seven. Denton just crossed the line over 1 million. So Harris, Travis, Tarrant, Dallas, Berg, Collin, and Denton fall within this category. They are now required to report data points on number of cases assigned, case clearance rate, number of pleas, number of cases tried before visiting or associate judges, cases disposed, jury panels, those types of things. That reporting started in April. On our website, we now have data for all those courts, for all those counties. We use Tableau, so it's very technologically interactive. But all those courts, their performance information is now out there. We did hear some of the concern, and we're not listing specific judge names, but we're listing the specific court names. So we're looking for information on performance of those courts that is out there. The other large case level data bill was House Bill 2384. This is the bill that is case level for every court. So no matter population size, so your district courts, statutory county courts, probate courts, and your county courts. We are requiring clearance rate information, average time from filing to disposition, and the age of the court's active caseload. That is an annual report. So that will be, we'll run that report come November 1st. We're currently working with the regional presiding judges on establishing agreed upon performance standards. Once that information is published, if the presiding judge, regional presiding judges feel there are courts that aren't performing at a level that is acceptable, the presiding judges have the ability to assign mentor judges to those courts to help with their performance. We're meeting with the presiding judges in December to help finalize some of this information.
Are you going to develop a timeout corner too?
I might need to. There's a lot of anxiety over this particular bill because judges are concerned that this information will be used against them in a variety of ways. In all essence, it's really just about transparency, about how our courts are doing and just making that information available to the public. So currently, we're about to sign with a vendor to help capture all that information so that we can have it stored and then so that counties can start reporting that information easily. Another large project that I will mention briefly is the new Texas Business Courts and the new 15th Court of Appeals. Those were established last session and they actually went into operation September 1st. So just about a little over less than 2 weeks ago. I've been in courts for 20-something years and I've done a lot of projects. This is probably one of the most stressful and unique projects. We became real estate agents. We were negotiating leases. We were finding furniture to decorate offices. We were ordering robes. We were setting up a whole court system from the ground up. And part of the conundrum of it was the judges, once appointed, could decide where their chambers were going to be. And these judges weren't even appointed until a few months ago. So we just signed our last lease for one of the business courts on September 1st. The business courts they're located in all the 11 regions of the state, but currently there's only 5 that are active. So mainly along the I-35 corridor, Dallas, Fort Worth, Austin, Harris, and
San Antonio.
San Antonio. I'm actually supposed to be, we're training the business court judges right now. We did an all-day training yesterday. We're in day 2 today over at the Capitol. All 10 judges are there being trained. We also met with the new 15th Court of Appeals judges yesterday. The 15th Court of Appeals is located in Austin. If you're familiar with any of the buildings, it's the Clements Building. It's one of the buildings that's sort of catty corners of the Capitol campus. They have a clerk that's been appointed, Chris Pine. We also have an interim clerk for the business courts, Beverly Crumley. She is from Hayes County. It's been a very massive project. you want more information about the business courts and their jurisdiction and those types of things, we'd be happy to talk to you and explain that to you. Just a few more projects that we thought you might be interested in. We are on the tail end of wrapping up a statewide court and clerk staffing study. We've been contracting with Texas A&M to determine current staffing levels in all of our courts across the state. With a formula and recommendation on what the staffing levels should look like based on filings, case types, and those types of things, as well as recommendations on appropriate salary levels for those positions. So what we've heard over the last couple of years when we did the judicial staffing study was, that's great, but we need some advocates, someone to advocate for our staff, that we need more staff at our commissioners' courts. Those don't understand our staffing needs. And then there's just pay disparities across the state with court coordinators making much more in Harris County than up in Amarillo. So we're doing a third-party recommendation on what staffing should look like in our courts, as well as what the salary schedule should look like. That is due to the legislature on December 1st. So we are actively wrapping that up. This is really not for us because we have no influence on those decisions. They're all local decisions. We're just doing it, one, because the legislature directs us to, but two, to provide to the counties for their use. Megan wanted me to talk to you about the tax reminder program. That was also directed for us to do by the legislature. We just contracted with a vendor, eCourt Date. They are a well-known vendor for something like this. Essentially what this is free of charge to courts and counties if they want to implement a text reminder program that interfaces with their case management system. Much like your doctor's appointments, reminders, and those types of things. This would be free for any court that is interested. We have 21 early adopters of this. Hidalgo is one of the first counties to reach out and interested. It's the vendor says about 4 to 6 weeks to get the entire court set up on the program. So again, this is completely complementary to the counties and the courts that are interested. Studies have shown over and over again that these reminders are helpful to get people to court. To close out, as Dylan mentioned, our next judicial council meeting is September the 27th. We've been very active on the judicial council level. Judicial council has committees that meet in between legislative sessions to look at certain charges that the chief recommends. The next judicial council will be hearing recommendations from all the committees. We are addressing topics specifically around artificial intelligence, training and resources for local administrative judges in counties, doing an ADA bench book for judges, a lot around judicial security and personal information, qualifications for associate judges, and much, much more. The committees will make their recommendations to the council on the 27th, and then the council will then decide if they want to formally adopt any of those recommendations. And if any early legislation is necessary to be filed before session starts, we'll make sure that happens. So Judicial Council has been very busy. If you are interested in any of those topics, the council meeting is a live meeting and it'll be televised on September 27th. I would answer any questions, much more I could talk about, but in the interest of time, I think those are good topics for you to learn about.
I have two questions. The easy one first is the September 27th. It's televised on what, YouTube or, okay. And that's just on the OCA website. And the other question that I have for you goes back to the reporting, because of course I'm in one of the jurisdictions that's going to have to do that. Have you guys made, I guess, parameters or procedures or concessions for the centralized docketing systems that Bear County has and then the hybrid one that Travis County has? Because as you said, I think you had said that you're hearing concerns on specific judges, but the data that will be produced is by court. And in Bear County, there's 14 civil district courts and we have a bench sharing agreement. So foreseeably, he could hear a 438 case, even though I sit in the 438.
I know that Travis and Bear are the two counties that have been standing out because of the centralized docketing. I haven't been part of those conversations, and I'm confident that that has been worked out so that the reporting reflects accurately from the judges, but I don't know what that specific agreement was, but I know that they have been working on this for many, many months. And I'm almost confident they've worked it out because reporting should be done, and I haven't heard any concerns about it, at least from our side recently.
I know my training's next week, so I'm hoping that there'll be an answer there for that. Okay.
Well, thank you very much. We know you're very busy and certainly Huddle and I know about the business courts and what a huge thing that has been. So thank you very, very much. And I was really joking about timeout. Because, as the judges here know, we've had a real problem with judicial compensation. And it's a real problem. We're not going to be able to continue to attract the quality of judges that we need to continue to have the quality judiciary that we have in the state. And that kind of thing can be used as a means for us to help us all get the type of compensation that we need, that we can continue to have the qualified bench that we need. So thank you very much. We really appreciate
I
it.
will say, our preliminary look at the performance of courts has been positive. The majority of courts and judges are actually doing very well.
That's the problem. There'll be one or two.
Right.
And then that causes a problem really for not just the judiciary, but for the entire state of Texas. Because like I said, it's critically important that we have a qualified judiciary. So
There's one other problem. This is something that I don't know if you've been involved in my court, what we did, but the power to report lies exclusively with the clerk. In most of the CMS systems, the judge doesn't have the authority to go in and change things like disposed, which is the mark that triggers the OCA showing it as a disposed case. In one of my counties, it showed less than a 100% closure rate in criminal cases, and I had 0 pending felonies at that time. So I knew it was wrong. So we hired a college student to go in, one of the benefits of being a small county. And they went back 10 years looking at every case, whether it was marked disposed, pulled the file. And we found hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of disposed cases that were not marked disposed in the system because they don't care. The clerk's busy. And so as we went through, we were seeing the numbers double. So I would go from 110% to 240%. One of the counties was 1,200% closure rate during the pandemic because there were no new files. And we closed all the old ones. And so then we went back and saw the reporting, what they were going to do with it. And so you can imagine what I did, creating this process where I got my clerk to work with them to get the ability to mark things disposed, my coordinator. And so she went with the clerks and marked hundreds and hundreds of closed cases that were showing up as if I had a 37% closure rate. And when we got done, it would be 300% closure rate. So that is a grave concern if the judges don't have the ability to double check. Because in Harris County, there's no possible way you could do that. You've got tens of thousands of cases. Those numbers are not going to be accurate unless the clerk put them in right, and there's almost no way to check it. So I have, we fixed it for us.
is the coordinator the one, coordinator's ones doing
The
that?
clerks are the ones that are able to mark them disposed. But in my system, because we use the rural UCMS, we found out that we had a little bit more access than they have in the cities to view. So that's why we hired the college student, paid her $15 an hour, just sit day after day comparing files.
Judge, you don't mean that, you mean that the district clerk is in charge?
Correct.
Not the person who works for you personally in your court and is accountable to you.
Clerk, you don't mean like my clerk.
No, no, no.
Like that.
No, we don't have clerks. You're right.
This is.
Right, Justice Huddle. It's the district clerk.
I see.
The district clerk is the only one who has that authority in most of the CMS, the case management systems. And the judges are blocked out unless the clerk grants you that authority, which you might imagine they don't want to do. They don't want us in their business. So
And if I can add on that, we don't have a district clerk in our court. So just like we don't have bailiff, we don't, we don't have a district clerk in our court. So I'm gonna have to explain to my court coordinator that she needs to do extra work and then she'll probably be going, right, where's that race? Because
But
she's
I
gonna
think-
say, I'm doing, this plus all of this and now I have to do this also. So My concern is not gonna be the district clerk's office at all. It's gonna be my court coordinator getting on. for
But I
sure.
think you want
But
that.
that's better.
Because that is,
Yeah.
that person has a reason to protect you.
Overworked and underpaid.
Well, she might lose her job if she doesn't do it, not because of you.
It's help. OCA staff is on the ground. And they're talking, y'all are talking about hiring some more,
So
9 more employees to go
most-
into counties.
our highest priority legislative appropriation request was for the docket rangers, as we call them, were to go to the clerk's offices to help.
I know.
with that reporting. And
They're
then
gonna get their own
we've
show.
been, our staff and us have been traveling, doing a road show, trying to fix a lot of these reporting. When this started coming out, we discovered that was a problem in many places.
There's a lot of problems like that. When I was a trial judge, it was very difficult to understand exactly where to put all these classifications as far as what the records are, the different, haven't you all had this issue? You know, it's not just evident what these different things mean. And I think they mean different things to different people. So I've never really thought that reporting was accurate because I don't think it's uniformly, put in.
And it's complicated. Some of them don't, their turnover in the clerk's offices in these small communities can be rapid. But, for example, one of them didn't know that a non-suit when filed is effective. And so every case that had a non-suit filed was marked open because they didn't know that they're not waiting for an order from us to close it. That's one of 100 examples that they just don't understand. And so they don't look at it. It's hard to explain. It's not malicious most of the time. They just don't know. And so it's not their problem. I do want to give kudos to OCA because when we discovered this and we reached out to them, they have been working with us. I think they call it pushing the report or something like some phrase they use, but Lori is working with them to make that happen before the upcoming deadline. Because of course, I don't want it to hit the media that I had 3 disposed cases of a certain character in a county. And it was, all of them were disposed and they showed 3 in that one county for the year. You can imagine how well that went over in the local community. So they do work with you, but the judges and anybody listening on YouTube, if you check and find that yours was like mine, reach out to them and they'll help you work with the clerks to get the clerks to update the numbers so that OCA can push it out before the report is published. Because it's weeks away now, right?
Well, November 1st is the deadline, but we're working with the regional presiding judges about what actually needs to be published and knowing the sensitivity of the reporting issues and discrepancies. We're very sensitive to that on what is actually published on the end of the year
Where is it going to be published?
on our website.
Here's what it's like.
Every newspaper, that's where it's going to be.
Absolutely.
Okay, well. Okay, anything else on that? Okay, Justice Hedl, Collaborative Council.
Yes, so Collaborative Council met this morning. So before we met here, they were meeting with commission staff at 8:30. So been here longer than the rest of us. And what we had today was Sarah Worthington of Texas Rio Grande Legal Aid wanted to spend some time with an announcement. So Sarah, go ahead.
If y'all can hear me okay, just 2 very brief announcements. The first is, it's been a year since I've been with y'all in person. I wasn't feeling well the last time we met, so I wanted to share something very cool that happened with our project within the last year. We were very blessed by the Texas Access to Justice Foundation to receive a grant this year called the Legal Aid for Children's Health and Security. It's another mouthful, just like our project name, but that grant allowed us to hire 2 new project attorneys and a paralegal and a project coordinator. And that increase in staff, if y'all remember 2 years ago, I was solo with our project, just on life support, trying to keep going. And so this year we've been able to significantly increase our staff, which has in turn significantly increased our opportunities to conduct outreach to youth, young adults, department staff, service providers. Has allowed us to increase our case numbers. And we're rocking and rolling right now. So thoughts and prayers going into this legislative session that funding stream will be renewed so that we can continue doing this great work at the level that we're able to do it now with that funding. The other brief announcement in your materials, there's a flyer about free driver education. This is the product of a bill passed back in 2021 that provided legislative funding to the Texas Workforce Commission to provide funding to offer free driver's education to youth in foster care, youth who have aged out of foster care until they turn 26, as well as homeless youth and young adults who have been impacted by family violence. This program just went into effect July 1st, and so we've created flyers directed towards youth. You'll notice on the back, there's also a flyer for driver's education schools. Part of the trickiness of the timing and the rollout is that while this program is available and the funding is available, schools have to be registered vendors with the Texas Workforce Commission to be able to offer those services to qualifying youth. So to whatever degree you're able to, make sure that the youth in your circles have information about this program, and to the degree that you're connected with the driving education schools in your communities, reach out to them too. We're really we're doing a big effort. We partnered with another organization to mail out flyers to every single driver's education school in Texas that's licensed with TLDR. And we're sending out flyers to all PAL coordinators, to all transition centers, to all higher education foster care liaisons. So we're trying to move on both sides, educating driver's education schools on how they can register because they get paid at the same rate. They don't lose any money by offering their services being reimbursed by Texas Workforce Commission. So this is a huge deal for y'all who know young adults who have left foster care and how much of a struggle it is for them to become independent. This is game changing for them. So just wanted to make sure everybody's aware of this program and this project and how you can work with us to make sure that as many youth and young adults as possible can benefit. Thank y'all.
Thank you. Okay, so it looks like that we're coming to a close. Is there any new business? Anybody would like to bring up? Well, please mark your calendars. Our final meeting this year is on November the 15th. That's a Friday, and that's going to be virtual. And our meeting schedule for next year is Friday, February 7th. That's in person. Friday, May 9th, that's virtual. Friday, September 26th, which is in person, and Friday, November 14th, which is virtual. And before we leave, we would like to do some special recognitions for some very special people today. And we'd like to start out with Judge Selena Morales, who has done, my goodness, she's timed out for this 6-year period. And then before that, how many years before that?
It was 2 years.
For 2 years. So she really has served us well for many, many years, has done a wonderful job in Webb County, and certainly has helped us all with her wonderful insight and expertise and everything that she's brought to the commission for so many years. So we really do appreciate it so much. We have a certificate for you, Jamie, where it is. I brought it in from the court today, so I know it's here. So thank you very, very much for your service. And we hope that we know that we will continue to the good work that you do. Thank you, sir. And of course, Dylan, Mitch, my goodness, so we'll all start crying now. Dylan been here, I thought you had been here from the very beginning, but maybe it was 5 minutes after the meeting. But it's certainly for a very, very, very long time. And you've done so much for the commission, not only in terms of your legal expertise and what all you do as far as the legislative things that you've done and the things that you do as far as representation for the parties and children who are part of this very tragic system that they find themselves in. You've just done a huge, huge service for the people of the state of Texas, and we're forever grateful. We know that you're going to continue doing that good work, and of course, we'll still be working together. We know that, and I think you're just going to be almost where we could throw a ball and hit you across the street. But still, it's a loss to the commission, and whenever Jamie called Justice Huddle and me a couple of days ago and told us it was very sad for all of us. But we wish you the best and we will figure out how to make it somehow. But, we do have a certificate for you also, Dylan, and thank you very, very much. And with all of that, we have some cake that our wonderful Jamie has. I thought if you all know, she's a wonderful, she bakes and she
Oh.
bakes wonderful things, but she did not bake this. But she did get it from a very, very good bakery. So please don't leave without having some and helping celebrate the wonderful people that we are going to be losing, but we won't lose sight of you. We will simply see you a little bit further away. Thank you again. Okay, and safe travels to everybody until our next meeting, which is going to be November 15th, the day before my birthday. Because I like that.
So you're.
Actually.
Around.